Hair Tonic and Kreml Shampoo present the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes, starring Nigel Bruce as Dr. Watson and Tom Conway as Sherlock Holmes. Now, once again, it's time to keep our weekly appointment with that incomparable host and storyteller, Dr. Watson. I'm sure he's expecting us.
Of course I am, Mr. Bell. So come in, draw up your usual chair, and make yourself comfortable. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. What story are you planning to tell us tonight?
Quite an exciting one, I think. The only relic I have of it is this rather mildewed piece of paper. I came across it just before you arrived as I was going over my notes on the case.
Look, this doesn't look very exciting. It's a hotel bill, and all it says is board and lodging for 1 week, 28 shillings and sixpence. Then there's an extra item, 1 pint of ale not paid for, 5 pence.
And yet that extra pint of ale was ordered at the very moment when Sherlock Holmes and I entered into one of the weirdest experiences we ever had. I call it the adventure of the Sally Martin.
Before you begin the story, Dr. Watson, do you mind if I...
Have a word with our listeners? Of course not, Mr. Bell.
Men, if you want a successful, prosperous appearance, don't give your hair that cheap, greasy, plastered-down look. Many products advertise that they don't leave the hair looking or feeling greasy. But let's make this test. Run your hand over your hair. Does your hair feel greasy or sticky? Now look at your hand. Is there a greasy film on it? If there is, then you certainly are not using Kreml Hair Tonic. Because Kreml positively never leaves the hair looking or feeling greasy, sticky, or dirty. Kreml contains a very special hair grooming ingredient found in no other hair tonic. It makes dry, unruly hair stay in place longer. Gives it such a nice, healthy-looking luster, too. When you use Kreml, you can run your hand over your hair and no grease comes off. Notice, too, how delightfully clean your hair feels. And just see if the ladies don't like that natural, well-groomed look which Kreml always gives. Try it, men. Kreml, Kreml Hair Tonic. Now, Dr. Watson, how about the adventure of the Sally Martin?
Well, the story began many years ago in the tiny fishing village of Kingsgate on the Kentish coast. At my insistence, Sherlock Holmes had agreed to take a much-needed holiday, and we were staying for a few days at a small seaside inn known as the Silver Dolphin. The adventure began, I remember, on a foggy, bitterly cold evening. Holmes and I, after a hearty dinner, were seated in the public bar of the inn talking to a garrulous old sailor. Little did we think that even in that peaceful village, dark tragedy was stalking us. Tragedy that very soon was to be brought to our attention.
Here you are, Albert. Another pint.
Thank you kindly, sir. Here's your very good health,
What
gentlemen.
an amazing capacity. That's the fifth. I can't think where he puts it.
I see no mystery there, Watson. Go on with your story, Albert. You just reached the point where the shark had turned on you.
Well, gentlemen, I ups on the rail and dives into that raging sea. Pulls out me knife.
Oh, really? Where did you get the knife? I thought you said that you'd lost your clothes in the hurricane.
Stripped to me middle I was. But I always kept a Bowie knife stuck in me belt.
Oh, really? How uncomfortable.
Well, I see the white belly of the shark turning at me. I let him have it. A rip here, a slash there. Ooh, there was blood all over the place. Never saw such a mess. Storytelling's very dry work, gentlemen.
I'll order you another pint, Albert.
Thank you kindly, sir.
Watson, look who's just come in.
It's our old friend Sergeant Dobson, isn't it?
Yes, and judging by his expression, the local representative of the law has serious business on his mind. Good evening, Sergeant.
Good evening, Mr. Holmes. Evening, Dr. Watson.
How are you, Dobson?
Can I have a word with you, private-like?
Of course you can.
Oh, I beg pardon, sir, but you did say something about buying me another pint.
Don't worry, Albert. We'll have it sent over for you.
Please give Albert another pint, Annie. Put it on my bill.
Right you are, Mr. Holmes.
Perhaps you wouldn't mind stepping into the private bar, gentlemen.
Very well. Now, Sergeant, sit down and tell us what's on your mind.
Murder, Mr. Holmes.
Great Scott. Who? Where?
Well, have you gentlemen noticed the fancy sailing boat that's been moored out in the cove this past week?
Yes. I was informed that it was owned by George Byron, the Lancashire cotton manufacturer.
That's correct, sir. The boat's named the Sally Martin. And right at this moment, Mr. Byron's lying there in his cabin with a knife in his ribs, deader than a boiled mackerel.
Good gracious me.
I rode ashore to send a telegram to the police at Canterbury. but I left a constable to guard the people aboard.
Good.
I'm going back now to conduct my investigation. But the Canterbury police can't be here afore morning, and I was hoping that
we'd help you, Sergeant?
Well, sir, a case like this is a little outside of my experience.
Just a minute, Dobson. Mr. Holmes is still a sick man. It's cold out and foggy. As his doctor, I forbid...
Rubbish.
Oh,
how can I stay here in the inn while a murder lies waiting to be solved less than a mile away? Come, Watson. The game's afoot.
How much further is it, Sergeant?
About a quarter of a mile,
Well,
sir.
if we don't get there soon, I won't answer for the consequences. I'm a rotten sailor.
Cheer up, Watson. In the meanwhile, Sergeant, suppose you give me as many facts as possible. How many people are aboard the Sally Martin?
Well, there's 3 passengers, Mr. Holmes, and 2 in the crew.
Well, let's have those passengers first.
Well, there's Mrs. Byron, the dead man's wife. A lot younger than him, she is, and she looks a bit on the flighty side, if you ask me, even though she was having a proper fit of hysterics, like. And then there's Clarence Byron, the dead man's brother.
And what opinion did you form as to his character?
Well, sir, you understand I didn't talk to him much, but he acted cool as a cucumber, just as if murder didn't mean a thing to him.
And the third passenger?
Well, he's a young fella by the name of Hodgson, secretary to the dead man. Very nicely spoken gentleman he is, but it seemed to me as if Mrs. Byron had quite an eye for him, even through her tears. That's why I said she seemed flighty-like.
You're very observant, Sergeant.
Oh, it's just training, sir.
How about the 2 crew members?
Well, there's Captain Small. He seemed perfectly above board, and a man by the name of Coggins. Arthur Coggins. He's a deckhand, and a mighty surly one at that. He gave me quite a bit of back chat when I questioned him.
Holmes, how much further is it?
Barely 100 yards, old chap.
Oh, I feel awful. Do hurry up.
Move over, Sergeant. Let me take an oar.
There's the murdered man, Mr. Holmes. That's just how we found him.
Very illuminating.
Look at that murderous knife. It's buried to the hilt in his chest.
Yes, but more interesting than the knife at the moment is the tableau presented in this cabin. What story does it tell you, Watson?
Very simple story. Somebody opened the cabin door, came in, and stabbed him.
Oh, come now. Surely our years together have made you a little more perceptive than that.
I don't see what you're driving at.
Well, for one thing, in his right hand is an open book.
Oh, been reading?
Yes, and the sergeant has told us that the oil lantern beside his bunk was still burning when the body was found.
Oh, that's right, Mr. Holmes.
There's no sign of a struggle. The bedclothes aren't even rumpled. No cry for help was heard. So let us reconstruct the scene. Mr. Byron was lying in his bunk, reading, as you observed, Watson.
Oh, quite easy.
The door opens. The murderer comes in, the knife hidden in his or her clothing. The victim has no suspicion of his fate because the murderer was someone who could enter his cabin at will. And suddenly, the fatal blow is struck.
Then it must have been one of the 3 passengers.
I think we may reasonably include the captain. The master of a schooner surely would have the ability to enter his employer's cabin without creating suspicion.
Oh, you're right, Mr. Holmes.
I think we've seen enough here, Sergeant. Where are the passengers?
In their cabin, sir. I told them to wait there until they were sent for. The main saloon's empty. You could see them in there nice and private-like.
Splendid. Then let's go there, at once.
Mrs. Byron, my friend's only trying to help you.
Oh, how can he help me? He can't bring poor George back to life again, can he?
No, madam. But at least I can try to find his murderer for you.
He's right, Mum. So take it easy, like, and answer his questions.
Very well. What do you want to know, Mr. Holmes?
Can you suggest anyone who might have had the motive for murdering your husband?
Oh, 6 men. George made a lot of money. He was a hard businessman. He had many enemies.
But none of his business enemies had an opportunity of killing him tonight.
His biggest enemy, though I never could make him believe it, is on this very boat now. His brother Clarence.
Biggest enemy, his own brother. Oh, come, madam.
It's true, Clarence sponged on him, has done for years. And ever since I married George, he's tried to be more friendly to me than a brother-in-law should be. Mm-hmm. Just because I was once in the theatre, he seems to think I didn't know how that lady behaves.
You were in the theatre? I wonder if you knew a girl who was Daly's. Pretty little figure.
Watson, surely this is no time for your theatrical reminiscences.
Oh, sorry.
Mrs. Byron, are you familiar with the terms of your husband's will?
Everything he has comes to me.
Huh?
Well, that's perfectly natural, isn't it?
Perfectly. But in that case, your brother-in-law would hardly seem to profit from your husband's death.
I don't know what you're suggesting, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Do you think I stabbed him? I wouldn't have had the strength.
Mrs. Byron, I suggested nothing. But I'm interested to notice that you answer your questions as well as ask them.
Well, I'm not staying here to answer any more questions, Mr. Holmes. I'm going back to my cabin. If you want me, that's where you'll find me.
No, wait a minute, ma'am.
Let her go, Sergeant. And please ask Mr. Hodgson, the secretary, to come in here.
Just as you say, sir.
Upon my soul, she's a fine little thing, isn't she? That's attractive, too. What do you make of her, Holmes?
It's hard to say. If one wished to deduce motive, it would be easy.
Well, she must be 25 years younger than her husband. And a fortune coming to her. It is death, eh?
Precisely. And despite her own statement, a woman would have the strength to stab an unsuspecting man to death.
Here's Mr. Hodgson, sir.
Thank you, Sergeant. Please sit down, Mr. Hodgson.
Yes, Mr. Holmes. This is a shocking business.
It is indeed, my boy.
I'd like to ask you a few questions.
Any questions you like?
When did you last see your employer tonight?
Shortly after dinner, Mr. Holmes. He was taking a turn round the deck. We chatted for a few minutes, and then I went to my cabin and retired. It was about 9:30 or 9:45.
You heard no cry for help? No shout in the night?
No, none. The first I knew of the tragedy was when the captain awakened me.
Can you suggest who might have had a motive for his murder?
Mr. Holmes, that's a little hard to answer.
Come now, Mr. Hodgson. Don't hold anything back. You'll have to talk in a court of law, you know.
Yes, I suppose so. Well, gentlemen, in my capacity as secretary, I did know that my employer's brother, Clarence, has been borrowing heavily. Only yesterday morning I was compelled to draw my employer's attention to an irregularity in the monthly bank statement. A £500 check had been drawn. The signature was a forgery.
And you think that Clarence Byron committed that forgery?
Yes, I do, sir. And so did my employer. The two brothers had a terrible row about it.
Sergeant, will you be good enough to ask Mr. Clarence Byron to come here, please?
Right you are, Mr. Holmes.
One very personal question, Mr. Hodgson. Was the relationship between you and your employer's wife a purely social one?
As a matter of fact, Mrs. Byron has been very kind to me.
Oh, really?
My family are dead, and she's taken an interest in me. But I give you my word that it's been purely platonic.
Mr. Holmes.
Yes, Sergeant Dobson?
Mr. Clarence Byron's lying in his bunk, sir. Says he can't come here. He's got a heart attack.
A heart attack? That's rather convenient, eh, Holmes?
Yes, Watson. And it's also convenient that there's a doctor aboard. Let's go and see him, shall we?
Feel any better, Mr. Byron?
Yes. Yes, I do, Doctor. That injection you gave me helped. It was digitalis, I suppose.
No, it wasn't. Holmes's heart's perfectly sound. He was simulating an attack.
So I gathered, since an injection of plain water apparently gave him immediate relief.
Plain water?
Yes, your heartbeat was full and regular, and your color normal. So I decided to try an experiment.
And a very successful one. Why did you pretend to have a heart attack, Mr. Byron?
I wasn't pretending. I do have a bad heart.
That I don't doubt. Only a bad heart could prompt you to swindle your brother and then murder him.
I didn't murder him. Though, I can tell you who did.
Oh? You are very eager to shift suspicion, Mr. Byron. Who, in your opinion, murdered your brother?
It's that deckhand, Arthur Coggins. Only a few days ago he threatened my brother's life.
You heard him make the threat?
Yes, I did. It was his second day aboard. It was early in the morning. I was strolling on deck when I came on this man Coggins, who was standing by the mainmast, practicing throwing a knife. You're pretty handy with a knife, Coggins.
What's that?
I said you're pretty handy with a knife.
Yes. I know how to use a knife.
Do you think you're going to like being on this ship?
No. Not if I don't get treated like a human being. Just yesterday, the owner yells out to me, "Here, you, whatever your name is, treating me like dirt, whatever your name is. Can't he find out my name? I'm as good as he is." One of these dark nights, he'll get what's coming to him.
That's what he said, Mr. Holmes. And he looked as if he meant business.
He's an expert with a knife, you say. Holmes, do you think it's possible that Coggins threw the knife through a porthole into the dead man's cabin?
Yes, Watson, it's possible. Your story was interesting, Mr. Byron, though, of course, entirely uncorroborated. I think we'll go and talk to the captain and see if he can supplement your information.
Well, Mr. Holmes, I can't answer for the passengers. That's no business of mine.
I appreciate that, Captain Small. But you'll answer for your crew, no doubt.
That I will, sir. And this man Coggins is a no good if ever I saw one. Insubordinate, surly, always talking about how he's as good and better than those who employ him.
And why did you engage him, Captain?
I didn't, sir. That was arranged by my employer, Mr. George Byron. If I had my way, Coggins would have gone back ashore the first day he stepped aboard.
Where are his...
Great Scott. Was that a revolver shot?
Well, it sounded like it. And it came from the forecastle.
Mr. Holmes! Mr. Holmes!
This way, Sergeant.
Good heavens.
Why, it's Coggins.
With a smoking revolver in his right hand. He's committed suicide.
Yes. Very convincing, isn't it? His head is sprawled on a piece of foolscap. A confession note, no doubt.
Yes, it is. Look at this. I killed him, and with my record I knew you'd catch me, so I took the quick way out. Case is solved, Holmes.
On the contrary, Watson, it's becoming more involved. If you look closely, you will realize that we now have 2 murders to solve instead of 1. And somewhere on this boat, a murderer is still at large, and may strike a 3rd time.
In just a moment, we'll find out if the murderer does strike a 3rd time. But first, men, if you're bald, you might as well grin and bear it, because science tells us it's impossible to grow hair where the hair roots are dead. But you certainly can make the most of the hair you've got. And men, you can't beat Kreml hair tonic. To help you, Kreml contains very special hair grooming ingredients found in no other hair tonic. That's why Kreml keeps hair neatly in place longer and without that offensive, greasy look. But Kreml does lots more than keep hair looking handsome. Let me repeat, Kreml does lots more than keep hair looking handsome. A massage with Kreml helps stimulate circulation right in the surface of the scalp. Your scalp feels so alive, so invigorated. At the same time, it removes loose dandruff and has a fine lubricating effect on a dry scalp. And for hair that's so dry that it cracks and falls, remember Kreml actually helps condition the hair, in that it leaves it feeling so much softer and more pliable. Men, buy a bottle of Kreml at any drug counter. It's such a nice, clean product you can use it every day so that your hair always looks its best. Kreml. Kreml Hair Tonic. So, Dr. Watson, the apparent suicide turned out to be another of the murderer's victims.
Yes, Mr. Bell. Holmes at once sent Sergeant Dobson to check the passengers while the 3 of us stood in that tiny cabin, an oil lamp swinging above us and shedding a strange glow on the macabre scene. I asked him why he was so positive that it wasn't suicide.
You will notice, Watson, that the revolver is in Coggins' right hand.
Yes, Holmes, I don't see what...
Then ignore the right hand and observe the left. A deckhand is accustomed to hard manual labor. Notice the calluses on his left hand and the freedom from them on the right.
By Jove, he was left-handed.
Yes, he was, Mr. Holmes. I've noticed him at work.
Again, you'll observe the shot entered his head from behind the right ear. A remarkable feat of dexterity for a left-handed man.
And the murderer had the note ready, shot Coggins from behind, but made the mistake of placing the revolver in the wrong hand.
Precisely. But this note, obviously in disguised writing, poses another problem. What does the phrase, "and with my record, I knew you'd catch me," mean?
He must have had a police record.
But why volunteer the information? I wonder if the murderer had a reason... Captain, you said that Coggins was engaged by Mr. George Byron.
Well, sir, he told me about the new man, but I don't know that he interviewed him personally.
Where was he engaged?
At the Seamen's Hostel here in the village.
Oh, what are you getting at, Holmes?
Surely it's obvious, Watson. If this man Coggins had a police record, his murderer might have deliberately placed him on this boat knowing he would be suspected. Yes, it's possible. But the question is, who engaged him? Well, Sergeant?
All 3 of them in their cabins, Mr. Holmes, and swore they hadn't left them.
And yet we know that one of them must have slipped down here and shot Coggins.
Lock them in their cabins, Sergeant. Keep good watch on them. Dr. Watson and I are going ashore.
Ashore? Why, Holmes, when the murderer's here on this boat?
Because I'm convinced that the clue to his identity lies waiting for us at the Seamen's Hostel. Where is the place, Sergeant, and who runs it?
Old Ma Jenkins. It's the house just next to the Red Lion on the quayside.
Splendid. Watson, we're taking this note and rowing ashore.
Another trip in that filthy rowing boat? Must we, Holmes?
It's a fine time of night to rootle a respectable woman out of a warm bed, I must say, and no mistake.
But, Mrs. Jenkins,
Call me Ma. Everyone calls me Ma.
Very well. We've come to you because you're the one person who can help solve 2 murders that took place on the Sally Martin tonight.
Murder? Come into me parlor. I'll light the lamp. There. Now, what's this you say happened aboard the Sally Martin?
The owner, Mr. Byron, was stabbed to death about 10 o'clock tonight. Later on, a seaman by the name of Arthur Coggins was killed, too.
Arthur was killed.
You knew this man, Arthur Coggins?
Of course I did. Over a year he's been staying with me. He couldn't get a ship because of his record.
What record was that?
He brought his ship's papers to me. They all do when they're out of a berth. The last ship he was on 2 years ago it was, he got mixed up in a knife fight.
Oh, did he?
Alaska was killed and Arthur arrested. They couldn't prove he was guilty, but he hasn't had a berth since because it was written in his papers.
That fits in with your theory, Holmes. The murderer engaged him deliberately, knowing his record.
Exactly. Mrs. Ma.
That's me.
Do you recall the name of the man who interviewed Coggins?
No.
The man who engaged him for the Sally Martin?
No. But it's here in my book. It's the last entry I made. Here it is.
Clarence Byron.
The brother. There's our man, Holmes.
Could you describe the appearance of Mr. Byron, Ma?
No, I can't say I remember much about it. He was all muffled up. He was a nice-spoken gentleman, though.
You can recall no clue to his identity? It's worth a sovereign to you if you can.
A sovereign? Well, let me think hard. Yes, there's one thing I do remember. He had a gold signet ring on his right hand.
Splendid, Ma. Watson, the case is solved.
Of course it is. Clarence is the man.
May I congratulate you on your powers of observation, Watson. Ma, here are 2 sovereigns for you.
2? But you
The
said...
extra one is for the privilege of borrowing this registry book of yours for a few hours.
No.
I'm taking it back to the Sally Martin with us so that we may compare the handwriting in it with that of a murderer.
But this is ridiculous, Mr. Holmes. Why should you ask Clarence to sign his name?
Bear with me a few moments longer, Mrs. Byron, and you'll see why.
Blessed if I know what you're up to, Mr. Holmes,
A
either.
little patience, Sergeant, and you'll see, too.
Have you any objection to signing your name, Mr. Byron?
I suppose not, though I'm just as confused as the rest of them. There.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Hodgson, I wonder if you'd mind helping us.
Of course not, Mr. Holmes. What can I do?
You saw a forged check. I wonder if you'd try and imitate the signature that Mr. Clarence Byron has just written.
Mr. Byron's signature?
Yes, his writing is extremely individual, but I think you could help prove that under certain circumstances it can be elastic. See how nearly you can imitate it. I think it'll help us to prove that he murdered his brother.
Clarence, you did murder George. I knew it.
Mabel, you're out of your mind.
Will you copy his signature, Mr. Hodgson?
Of course, if you think it'll help you.
Holmes, look.
Hodgson. Sign, please, Mr. Hodgson.
Clarence Byron.
There. Thank you. That's a remarkably fine gold signet ring you're wearing, Mr. Hodgson.
Thank you.
Watson, give me Ma Jenkins' registry book.
There you are, Holmes.
Sergeant, I want you to compare the signature in this book with that which Mr. Hodgson has just given us. I think you'll agree that they're both written by the same man.
They are. Well, blow me down.
So he forged Clarence's signature.
Exactly. He is quite a specialist in handwriting.
Albert, you didn't kill him. You couldn't have done it.
It's no good, Mabel, and you know it as well as I do. You knew what I was up to. You helped me. You suggested that I use Clarence's name.
That's a lie.
A lie or not, Sergeant, I suggest you take out your notebook. They're talking in front of witnesses, so make the most of the fact. The sun's coming up, Watson.
Yes, the sea's calmer, Higgins.
A very satisfactory start to a new day. Confessed murderer and his accomplice, both of them safely in the care of the police.
Yes, I was convinced, until we found him murdered, that Coggins, the The deckhand was the guilty party.
Exactly what you were meant to think.
I thought that, as he was an expert knife thrower, he could have thrown one through a porthole into the dead man's cabin.
No, Watson. Both portholes were at the head of the bunk, but the knife wound was from the underside of the heart and upwards. It would have been impossible to have thrown the knife through a porthole at such an angle.
Yes, I can see it all now. Young Hodgson, coveting his employer's wife, planned a knife murder and then engaged Coggins, knowing that with his record, he'd be the logical suspect.
Yes, but like so many murderers, he tried to be too clever. He left enough clues to hang himself half a dozen times
Why
over.
did Clarence pretend to have that heart attack?
The nervousness of a person who knows himself to be under suspicion. A futile attempt to escape interrogation.
Well, I'm glad it's all over. I'm exhausted and I'm frozen, and I'm delighted to think that this is my last trip in this horrible rowing boat.
Whereas I'm feeling very stimulated, and in a distinctly altruistic mood.
Altruistic? What do you mean, Holmes?
If you'll observe the flurry of excitement at the quayside, the figures in blue serge that are at this moment embarking in boats, you'll realize that the police from Canterbury have just arrived.
I still don't see how altruism comes into the picture.
I intend to claim no credit in the solution of this crime. And in consequence, I see little reason why our old friend Sergeant Dobson should not very soon be known as Inspector Dobson.
In just a moment, Dr. Watson will tell us something about next week's story. But first, girls, if you want to really make a hit with the boyfriend, here's a beauty tip right out from here in Hollywood. And one which lovely Powers models were among the first to discover.
Give your hair a 10-minute glamour bath with Kreml shampoo. This amazingly beautifying shampoo has been especially developed so that it actually brings out all the brilliant, natural luster of each tiny strand of hair. Kreml shampoo leaves the hair fairly teeming with highlights.
And don't forget, Kreml shampoo is wonderful for the entire family.
Yes, even in the hardest water, it whips up gobs of rich, luxurious foam, which penetrates right to the scalp and removes all loose dandruff as well as the dirt.
So, ladies, buy the large family size of Kreml shampoo. Kreml. Kreml shampoo, the largest selling shampoo with an oil base. Now, Dr. Watson, what about next week?
Well, now let me see. Next week, I think I'll tell you how Holmes solved a murder with only one clue. The depth to which the parsley had sunk in the butter on a hot summer's day. I call this bizarre adventure The Strange Death of Mrs. Abernethy.
Tonight's new Sherlock Holmes adventure was suggested by an incident in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's story, The Reigate Puzzle. Nigel Bruce appeared by permission of California Pictures. Tom Conway through the courtesy of Eagle Lion Pictures. This is Joseph Bell speaking for Kreml Hair Tonic and Kreml Shampoo, and inviting you to be with us next week at this same time when Dr. Watson will tell us about the strange death of Mrs. Abernethy. This is ABC, the American... Kreml Hair Tonic and Kreml Shampoo present the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes, starring Nigel Bruce as Dr. Watson and Tom Conway as Sherlock Holmes. Now it's time to keep that weekly appointment with our good friend and host, Dr. Watson. Let's join him, shall we? Good evening, Dr. Watson.
Good evening, Mr. Bell. As usual, you're punctual to the minute.
Naturally, when I have an appointment with my favorite doctor.
Oh, well, draw up your usual chair and make yourself comfortable.
Thank you.
That's it.
All ready with tonight's new Sherlock Holmes adventure, Dr. Watson?
Yes, my boy. I was going over my notes on the case before you arrived. I came across this old theater program. I think it'll interest you.
Garrick Theater, Sir Basil Wentworth in a revival of Martin Reeves' famous play, The Road is Narrow. A production that you and the great Sherlock Holmes attended, I'm sure.
We certainly did, Mr. Bell, though at the time we had no idea that we were about to become involved in the tragic death of Martin Reeves, You've probably heard of him, haven't you, Mr. Barrow?
It seems to me I had to read him in school, Dr. Watson.
He's rather out of fashion now, like so many other good things. But in the 1890s, apart from Lord Tennyson, there wasn't a more famous writer in England, or a more respected one. The story I'm going to tell you tonight, Mr. Bell, concerns the horrible circumstances surrounding his death.
Sounds like a mighty intriguing Sherlock Holmes adventure. But before you begin, Dr. Watson, do you mind if
you have your little talk? No, of course not, Mr. Bell.
Men, well-groomed hair helps so much in giving a man that prosperous, successful appearance. And I'm sure you'll want to know why Kreml hair tonic is preferred among America's top-flight executives. Kreml never plasters the hair down with sticky goo, which makes your hair and scalp feel so dirty. It never gives hair that old-fashioned, greasy, patent leather look. You see, Kreml is a very highly specialized hair tonic. It contains a unique and utterly different combination of hair grooming ingredients that's never been duplicated in any other hair tonic. That's why Kreml keeps unruly hair so neatly in place longer, with such a handsome, healthy-looking luster. What I especially like about Kreml is that after you use it, you can run your hand back over your hair, and your hair never feels sticky or dirty. No greasy film comes off on your hand. Yet Kreml keeps hair in perfect order from morning till night, always looking so healthy and handsome. Kreml, Kreml Hair Tonic. Now, Dr. Watson, what about the singular death of Martin Reeve?
Well, Mr. Bell, that adventure began late on a foggy evening many, many years ago. Sherlock Holmes and I had been to the Garrick Theatre to see the revival of Martin Reeve's play, and I remember that we decided to walk home to Baker Street. As we approached the old familiar door of 221B, our footsteps echoed hollowly in the deserted street, and the chimes of a neighboring church reminded us of the fact that it was midnight.
A delightful evening, Watson. A good dinner, an excellent bottle of wine, and 3 hours of theatrical magic.
Well, personally, I found the play rather depressing.
Its theme is a morbid one, but the writing and construction are flawless. Yes, a magnificent play and well worth reviving. By the way, I noticed an item in the Times this morning concerning Martin Reeve. He's dangerously ill.
Oh, really? Well, he must be quite an old man.
82, to be precise.
Really, is he as old as that?
Curious career, Watson. His greatest success was written when he was a young man. In the past 50 years, he has never written anything to compare with tonight's play.
No, I don't think it... Holmes, look up at our window.
Hello. The gas is brightly lighted, whereas Mrs. Hudson invariably turns it low when we're out. And look at the silhouette on the blind. There's a man pacing up and down the room.
A visitor at midnight, Holmes. This looks ominous. Be careful now. It may be some sort of trap.
I think not, Watson. If some desperado were lying in wait for me, I doubt whether he'd be stupid enough to turn up the gas to advertise his presence.
Just the same, I wonder how he got in.
Presumably through the front door. Mrs. Hudson has instructions to let a client wait in our rooms if his business seems urgent.
Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
At your service, sir.
I'm Dr. Manners, Harvey Manners.
How do you do, Dr. Manners? This is my colleague, Dr. Watson.
How do you do, Doctor?
I must apologize for being here at such an hour of night, Mr. Holmes, but my business is urgent.
I'm sure it is, Doctor.
I left Carlisle this morning, arriving at St. Pancras Station 2 hours ago. I came directly here, persuaded your housekeeper to let me wait for you.
Then sit down, my dear doctor, and tell me what urgent business has brought you to London.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Holmes, I've been acting in the capacity of personal physician for Martin Reeve, the playwright.
Martin Reeve? What an extraordinary coincidence. We've just returned from seeing the revival of his play, The Road is Narrow. We were talking about him as we walked home.
I understand the grand old man is dying.
He's not in good shape, Mr. Holmes. His heart's in very bad condition. Auricular fibrillation, Dr. Watson.
Oh, then at his age, I imagine you don't hold out much hope.
No, but I think with care, he might last a year or two. But the reason I've come to you, Mr. Holmes, is that I'm convinced that although he's a dying man, someone is trying to murder him.
To murder him? Good Lord.
What reason do you have for saying that, Dr. Manners?
Well, Mr. Holmes, I've been in almost daily attendance on Mr. Reeve. Last night, his coachman drove over to get me, saying that his master had suffered another bad attack. When I got to the house, I found that Mr. Reeve had received a severe shock. He was in a state of almost complete hysteria, and he kept insisting that he'd seen an apparition in his room a few hours earlier.
What kind of an apparition?
A ghost from his past, as he referred to it. I think that someone arranged for that apparition, that they knew of his heart condition, and also knew that a sudden fright could kill him.
It's possible, Dr. Manners, and it would be one of the least detectable methods of murder.
But who would want to kill a dying man?
Who lives at the house with him, Dr. Manners?
His daughter Catherine, his brother Silas, who's a drunken good-for-nothing, and his secretary, a fellow by the name of Hugh Kingslake.
Do you know the condition of Mr. Reeves's will?
No, but I do know he had dictated a new one a few days ago.
A fact that might easily have provoked a crisis. Dr. Manners, you say that Mr. Reeves spoke of seeing an apparition, a ghost from his past. Was he able to describe its appearance?
Well, he was a little incoherent, but he kept babbling something about blonde hair and blue eyes and a young man who'd come back from beyond the grave to haunt him.
Don't you think, Dr. Manners, that these might simply be the delusions of an old and a sick man?
I didn't overlook that possibility, I assure you, Dr. Watson, even though Mr. Reeves' mental faculties are remarkably acute for his age. But last night, after I'd given him a sedative, I examined his room. I found these, Mr. Holmes. That's when I decided to come to you.
Well, let's have a look at them. They look like blonde hair.
Yes, they are, Doctor. I found them on the bedclothes, and yet no one in that house has blonde hair.
Interesting. Very interesting. The hair is human, and yet the roots have minute particles of glue attached to them. Obviously, they're from a wig. Get out the timetable, Watson, will you?
Yeah, we're going to Carlisle?
On the earliest possible train. Though the grand old man of the English theatre is dying, we must do everything in our power to see that his death is not an unnatural one.
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I'm Hugh Kingslake, Mr. Reeves' secretary.
How do you do?
How do you do, sir? Your accommodations at the hotel are satisfactory, I trust, gentlemen?
Entirely,
Yes,
thank you,
we're very
Mr. Kingslake.
comfortable, thank you.
Good. Frankly, I'm most relieved that you're here. Mr. Reeve received a severe shock the night before last. I quite agree with Dr. Manners that someone deliberately induced that shock, knowing the serious condition of Mr. Reeve's heart.
Have you any idea who that someone might be?
Well, it's a little difficult for me to talk, Mr. Holmes. After all, I'm only an employee here, but I can't help feeling that... Oh, good morning, Mr. Reeve.
Kingslake, who are these men?
This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson and Mr. Silas Reeve.
How do you do, Mr. Reeve?
And what, may I ask, is the professional meddler Sherlock Holmes doing in my brother's house?
I'm here at the request of Dr. Manners.
Manners has no right to bring you here, sir. A lot of rubbish. All this talk about apparitions. Nonsense. Martin's in his second childhood. He's become a gibbering old fool. Personally, I wish he'd die and have done with it.
Well, upon my soul...
Never mind your soul, my good doctor. Why don't you mind your own business and get out of the house? We don't want detectives here.
Mr. Reeve, I've traveled some 200 miles to see your brother, and I have no intention of leaving this house without talking to him.
Then talk and the devil with you. And if my dear, distinguished brother tells you that I've been sponging on him for years, it's perfectly true.
Uncle, sorry.
Enter the beautiful Catherine to try and persuade her drunken old uncle to return to his room.
No, Uncle Silas. I came to get Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson. Dr. Manners said that Daddy can see them now.
Shall I take them up, Miss Reeve?
No, Mr. Kingslake. I will.
And don't be deceived by the Mr. Kingslake and the Miss Reeves gentlemen. My dear niece and this young man here have a dark secret. A secret that is perfectly apparent to every member of this household.
Uncle Silas.
They're in love. Delightful, isn't it?
Uncle, you're intolerable.
Will you lead the way, Miss Reeve?
Oh, yes, Mr. Holmes.
Don't forget to ask him about the play that made him so famous. You might learn some interesting facts.
I must apologize for Uncle Silas, gentlemen. I'm afraid he's like this all the time these days.
I quite understand, Miss
It
Reeve.
must be very distressing for you, my dear.
Oh, I'm used to it, Doctor. Here's Daddy's room. I won't come in with you. Too many people upset him.
Come in.
Please go in, gentlemen. I'll see you later.
Ah, there you are.
Who is it, Manners?
It's Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, Mr. Reeve.
Ah, good. You can leave us, Manners.
Yes, Mr. Reeve. I I'll see you both later.
Very well, Doctor.
Come. Sit on my bed. That's it.
How are you feeling, sir?
Old and ill. But I'm glad you're both here. Manners displayed unusual enterprise in persuading you to visit me. There's been a lot of nonsense printed about my impending death. Anyone would think a great man is dying.
The author of The Road is Narrow is a great man, Mr. Reeve.
He was a great man, Mr. Holmes.
What do you mean, sir?
The author of that play died 45 years ago.
What?
And yet, his ghost appeared in this room 2 nights ago.
Mr. Reeve, are you saying that you didn't write The Road is Narrow?
Yes, my boy, I am. And it's a secret that's been gnawing at me for years. Now that I'm on my deathbed, I'd like to clear my conscience.
Then who did write the play, sir?
A young friend of mine, by the name of Colin McGrath. I started life as a lawyer's clerk in Keswick, a few miles from here. Colin lived in the same village, and we became great friends. One day, he gave me the manuscript of his play to look at, and I realized it was a work of a genius. Suddenly he died, and no one knew about the manuscript.
You claimed it as your own, sir?
Yes. To my eternal shame, I did. Now, I want to make amends. Mr. Holmes, I want you to find out if any heirs of Colin McGrath still survive. If they do, I'll give them half of my estate.
Mr. Reeve, does anyone else know of this, fraud?
Yes. Knowing that I hadn't long for this world, I confided the secret to 3 members of my household.
And you're convinced that the apparition you saw the other night was that of the dead Colin McGrath?
There was no mistaking him. The blue eyes, the long golden hair. It was Colin, or his ghost come to haunt me on my deathbed.
This decision on your part to leave half of your estate to any heirs of the man you wronged, was that decision made before you had this strange visitation the other night?
Yes. Yes, it was.
Did you mention it to any member of your family, sir?
No. I did say something to Dr. Manners, and I didn't mention Colin McGrath's name.
It's obvious that someone wished to frighten you, knew your secret, and disguised himself to resemble Colin McGrath.
Yeah, it was Colin. Never forget his blue eyes. He was standing over there in the chest of drawers. He looked at me so reproachfully. So...
He's asleep.
Yes, Watson. And while he lies there, some member of this household continues to plot his death. We must work fast.
Well, what are we going to do?
Split forces. I shall remain here for a while and see what may be found out. I'll meet you at our hotel later and we'll compare notes.
And what shall I do?
Go to the village of Keswick. Colin McGrath lived and died there. See what you can find out about him, Watson.
Of course I remember Colin McGrath.
Well, I should be very grateful for any information about him, madam. As postmistress, I imagine that very little village gossip has escaped you.
Of course it hasn't. I remember the McGrath boy well. He was no good. Didn't he marry poor old Mrs. Northcliffe's granddaughter Susan and then go and desert her just to kill himself? And the poor girl was going to have a baby. No good on earth. That's what young McGrath was. And you can tell him I said so if you ever reach the place I'm sure he went to.
Oh, I said, well, they had a child, you say. What happened to it, madam?
How should I know? I'm only the postmistress. You'd better go and see the vicar, young man.
It's a tragic story you've told me, Dr. Watson.
But you remember Colin McGrath, sir?
Oh, very well. And I always suspected something akin to genius in the boy. That he burned with too hard and gem-like a flame. As Walter Pater has said, He burned himself out, destroyed his life, and poor Susan Northrip's with it. She died of a broken heart less than a year after his death.
And their child?
There was no money, no one to look after the boy. He was sent to an orphanage in Liverpool.
Then that child, if he's still alive, stands to inherit half of Martin Reeve's fortune. If only we can find him. Oh, it's good to be back here at the hotel, Holmes. I've had an exhausting day.
I trust you had better luck than I did. What did you find out?
That Colin McGrath had a child, that his wife died shortly after the child's birth, and that the boy was sent to an orphanage in Liverpool.
In Liverpool? Go on, Watson.
Well, the vicar gave me this photograph where we are, of Mrs. McGrath. It was taken on their wedding day.
Let me see it. But this is amazing, Watson. One of our problems is solved.
Well, I'm blessed if I see how.
Let me explain it to you. After you left, I had quite a long talk with the secretary, Hugh Kingslake. It transpired that he knew nothing of his parents. He had been raised in an orphanage, and the only memento he has is a picture of his mother. A picture that he carries in his watch.
And that picture
is a duplicate of this one.
Great Scott, and the fellow calling himself Hugh Kingsley is really the Colin McGrath heir.
Precisely. A fantastic situation indeed. Come on, old chap. Grab your hat and coat. We must drive over to Mr. Reeves and break the good news that the missing heir is a member of his own household.
But we're still no nearer finding out who's been trying to frighten old Mr. Reeves.
Surely that's obvious now, Watson. Come in. Dr. Manners, what's wrong?
Please come at once, both of you. It's Mr. Reeve.
Hot?
Yes, Dr. Watson. This evening, he had another visit from that apparition. I'm only afraid this time the devilish plan may work and that Martin Reeve won't live through the night.
In a moment, we'll find out what Sherlock Holmes says is obvious. But first, more and more men today are beginning to realize they should take better care of the hair they've got. And when you buy a hair tonic, why not get your money's worth? Why not enjoy the extra advantages of Kreml hair tonic? Kreml contains a special combination of hair grooming ingredients which is found in no other hair tonic. This highly specialized hair tonic keeps dry, stubborn hair neatly in place all day long, and always gives it such a natural, well-groomed appearance, never sticky or greasy. But men, Kreml does lots more than keep hair looking handsome. A quick massage with Kreml stimulates circulation right in the surface of the scalp, leaving your scalp feeling so alive, so invigorated. At the same time, Kreml removes loose dandruff. It's excellent to lubricate a dry scalp. And if your hair is so dry that it breaks and falls when you comb it, remember Kreml actually helps condition the hair, in that it makes it feel softer, more pliable. So men, just as soon as possible, buy a bottle of Kreml at any drug counter. Let Kreml always keep your scalp feeling clean and refreshed, your hair always looking its very best. Kreml, Kreml Hair Tonic. Well, Dr. Watson, this story certainly has me on the edge of my chair. What happened next? You drove over to Mr. Reeves' house, I suppose?
Yes, Mr. Bell, we did. And as we went rattling down the country lanes, the flickering oil lamps on Dr. Manners' carriage lighting a shadowy path, I found it almost impossible to get a word out of Sherlock Holmes. Holmes, sometimes you're the most irritating man on earth.
And what prompts that little tirade, Watson?
You haven't opened your mouth since we left our hotel.
Purposeless conversation is a waste of time. Not much further, is it, Dr. Manners?
No, Mr. Holmes. We're nearly there.
Well, I don't consider conversation purposeless when it clarifies the problem, Holmes. You said it was obvious who had been frightening Mr. Reeve. I suppose I'm stupid, but I find it far from obvious.
And yet the facts are clearly in front of your eyes. Eyes. That's it, Watson. Think about eyes.
The blue eyes of the supposed ghost, eh? But the Reeves family have all got brown eyes. Apparently it's a marked family characteristic.
Quite, Watson. That fact should lead you to the obvious conclusion.
Oh, you're always talking in riddles, Holmes.
Here we are, Mr. Holmes.
And Hugh Kingslake is standing at the front door. How is he, Mr. Kingslake?
Better, Mr. Holmes. Seems to have rallied a bit. I'm glad you're all here.
I'll drive my carriage round to the stables. Be back in a moment.
Come in, gentlemen. With Mr. Reeves so ill, it may seem a little inappropriate to announce my news. But Catherine consented to marry me tonight. We're engaged.
Oh, really? My congratulations.
Yes, indeed. She's a charming girl.
Oh, Catherine, darling. I've told them our news.
Oh, it must seem a terrible time to announce it, Mr. Holmes, with poor Daddy lying so ill upstairs.
It's quite understandable, Miss Reeve. And before we go up and see your father, I'd like you both to know that we have something in the nature of a wedding present for you.
A wedding present?
Yes. You're both familiar with the story of Colin McGrath, I understand?
You mean that he was the true author of The Road is Narrow?
Oh, yes, Mr. Holmes. Daddy told us all about it.
And did you also know that Mr. Reeve is planning to leave half his estate to the heir of Mr. McGrath?
I knew that, Dr. Watson. In my capacity as secretary, I had occasion to draw up a rough draft of the new will a few days ago.
Then I'm sure, Mr. Kingslake, that you'll be very interested to know that today Dr. Watson and I discovered that you are the son of Colin McGrath.
That I am?
You is the heir? Well, that doesn't seem possible.
The fact is proven beyond a doubt, Miss Reeve.
Then if Mr. Reeve makes the new will, I stand to inherit half the fortune.
Yes, my boy, you do. That's what Mr. Holmes meant when he was talking about wedding presents.
Help, come here, somebody!
That's Uncle Silas. He's upstairs with Daddy.
What's wrong, Mr. Reeve?
Fire! I knocked over a lamp in Martin's room.
And Daddy's up there.
The room's ablaze.
What? Come on, Watson.
Well, the whole top landing's burning, Holmes.
Can't go through this way.
We just can't stand here. Mr. Reeve will roast alive. I'm going after him.
Come back, Kingslake.
Come back, come back. Great Scott, he went right through the flames, Holmes.
Send one of the servants for the fire brigade. And tell the rest to bring buckets of water. And to bring them fast.
Dr. Watson, how is Hugh?
Well, he's going to pull through, Miss Reeve. He's badly burned, but he'll be all right, won't he, Dr. Manners?
Yes, a few weeks in the hospital, and he'll be as good as new.
And Father?
Well, I am afraid he's dead, Catherine.
Dead? Oh, poor Daddy.
Oh, my dear, he might have lived for a time, but the shock of the fire coming so close on top of the other one was too much for him. He died just as I took him from your fiancé's arms.
So that by knocking over a lamp, I was responsible for my brother's death?
Yes, Mr. Reeve. The credit is yours. In fact, I wouldn't be at all surprised if the local police might consider booking you on a charge of arson.
Rubbish! It was an accident, and you can't prove otherwise.
Possibly not. But there's one matter I can settle here and now. 2 nights ago, someone in this house tried to murder Martin Reeve by posing as Colin McGrath. The same despicable action was repeated tonight.
Well, one person that we can eliminate is Hugh Kingslake. He nearly gave his life just now, trying to save his employer.
Then who was responsible, Mr. Holmes?
A feature of the impersonation that especially struck your father, Miss Reeve, was the color of the eyes. He described them as a brilliant blue.
Then that rules out Catherine and me. We both have brown eyes.
Precisely, Mr. Reeve. I have devoted some considerable study to the art of disguise. There are wigs and methods of altering height and weight. But the color of the eyes cannot be altered. Watson, 10 minutes ago you had the opportunity of examining Mr. Kingslake's eyes without the tinted glasses he's in the habit of wearing.
Well, they did fall off when he stumbled back down the back stairs, but I can't say that I noticed the color of his eyes.
They were blue, Watson. Brilliant blue, just as his father's were before him.
You mean that young Kingslake was responsible?
Yes, Mr. Reeve, I do.
But that's ridiculous, Mr. Holmes. He just hurt himself severely in trying to save Father.
True, Miss Reeve. But surely his reason was obvious. He intended to marry you. And when he learned a few days ago that your father planned to will half his estate to the McGrath heir, he decided to try and kill him before that will could be put into effect.
Oh, I see it all, Holmes. And then tonight, he realized that he was the heir.
Precisely, Watson. And so it was to his great advantage to see that his employer stayed alive to execute that new will. That accounts for his bravery in the fire tonight.
I can't believe it of him, Mr. Holmes.
I can. I've always disliked you, and I'll have great pleasure in prosecuting him.
It'd be hard to prove, Silas. After all, your brother did die a natural death.
Yes, Dr. Manners. I fear that legally there's very little we can do to Mr. Kingslake. But when he recovers and realizes that he risked his life for nothing, I think he'll find his own punishment. The change in the will was not made. The estate will be divided between the family, and I doubt if Mr. Kingslake will now acquire any of it by marriage.
No, of course he won't. I'll never see him again.
Oh, quite right, my dear, quite right. What a despicable scheme. And to think that his father wrote one of the greatest plays of our century.
I prefer to forget the fact, Watson. Emotional qualities are antagonistic to clear thinking. I assure you that the most winning woman I ever knew was hanged for poisoning 3 little children for their insurance money. And the most repellent man of my acquaintance is a philanthropist who has spent nearly $250,000 upon the London poor. Now, my dear chap, I think we should look up the next train back to London. Our work here is done.
In a moment, we'll hear about next week's story. But first, girls, here's a sensational beauty tip from some of the world's most divinely beautiful girls. Powers models. Girls who are famous for their enchantingly lovely silken sheen hair.
We glamour bathe our hair with Kreml shampoo. And really, ladies, you'll be amazed how Kreml shampoo brings out all your hair's natural sparkling beauty. It leaves hair shimmering with brilliant highlights that last for days.
And you can always count on Kreml shampoo to thoroughly cleanse your scalp and hair. It never leaves any dull, cloudy film. Then, too, the beneficial oil base helps keep hair from becoming dry and brittle.
That's right. Kreml shampoo leaves your hair so much softer, a silkier hair with satin smoothness. Your hair holds a better wave, too.
So, ladies, buy a bottle of Kreml shampoo at any drug counter and see how easy it is to have naturally lustrous hair, a vision of beauty. Kreml, Kreml shampoo. And remember, a bottle of Kreml hair tonic or a bottle of Kreml shampoo makes a fine addition to that Christmas stocking. Well, Dr. Watson, I won't be seeing you before next Wednesday, so I'd like to wish you a very Merry Christmas.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Bell, and the same to you, my boy. I'd also like to take this opportunity of extending the season's greetings to all our listeners and all our friends. On behalf of our sponsors, on behalf of Mr. Conway and myself, and on behalf of Mr. McKnight, our director.
So, Dr. Watson, we'll be meeting again next Saturday night. What new Sherlock Holmes adventure are you planning to tell us then?
The strange story of a weird jungle music that was heard in the peaceful English countryside and of a diabolical plot that failed. I call it The Singular Affair of the White Cockerel.
Tonight's new Sherlock Holmes adventure was suggested by an incident in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's story, The Sign of Four. Nigel Bruce appeared by permission of California Pictures, Tom Conway through the courtesy of Eagle Lion. Help win the war against tuberculosis. Buy colorful Christmas seals and use them to dress up all your cards and packages. Buy the Christmas seals that help save lives today. This is Joseph Bell speaking for Kreml Hair Tonic and Kreml Shampoo, and inviting you to be with us next week at this same time when Dr. Watson will tell us about the singular affair of the White Cockerel. This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company. Kreml Hair Tonic and Kreml Shampoo present the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes, starring Nigel Bruce as Dr. Watson and Tom Conway as Sherlock Holmes. Well, once again, it's time to keep that weekly date with our good friend and host, Dr. Watson. Let's join him, shall we?
Come in, Mr. Bell.
Good evening, Dr. Watson.
Good evening, my boy.
How are you feeling after your Christmas holiday?
Remarkably well, thank you, Mr. Bell, considering how extremely hospitable my friends have been. Just a twinge or two of gout to remind me that an old man should treat tawny port with the respect that it deserves.
I know just what you mean, Dr. Watson.
Draw up your usual chair, my boy, and settle yourself down. That's it.
All ready with tonight's Sherlock Holmes adventure, Dr. Watson?
Yes, Mr. Bell. And when I was going over my notes on the case just before you arrived, I came across this white feather. It played a prominent part in tonight's adventure.
A white feather? That signifies cowardice, doesn't it?
Yes, it can, Mr. Bell, it can, but this is a very special feather. It was plucked from a white cockerel, and it helped Sherlock Holmes to foil one of the most diabolical plots that we ever encountered. But first, don't you want to have your usual word with our listeners?
Thank you, Dr. Watson. Men, if you want to stand out in the crowd, remember, well-groomed hair means a lot to a man's appearance. And I'm sure you'll want to know why so many of America's most prosperous and successful men use Kreml hair tonic. You see, Kreml contains a special combination of hair grooming ingredients which is found in no other hair tonic. This is why Kreml gives a man's hair such a natural, well-groomed look. It keeps hair neatly in place longer, too. Yet Kreml never leaves the hair looking or feeling greasy, sticky, or dirty. Just make this test, men. After you apply Kreml, rub your hand over your hair. Notice how delightfully clean your hair feels. Notice how no greasy film comes off on your hand or on your hatband. Kreml always gives your hair such a handsome, clean-cut appearance. At the end of the day, your hair looks just as neatly groomed as when you combed it in the morning. Buy a bottle at any drug counter. Kreml, Kreml Hair Tonic. Now, Dr. Watson, how about the story of the white cockerel?
Well, Mr. Bell, that adventure took place after Sherlock Holmes had given up his regular practice and retired to his bee farm on the Sussex Downs. I was staying with him there for a few weeks' holiday, and I remember coming down to breakfast one morning to find my old friend, his pipe clenched between his teeth, squatting on a stool, examining the contents of a large metal box at his feet. As he threw back the lid, I could see that the box was half full of papers. Papers tied up with red tape in separate packages. After sorting through them for a few moments, he turned to me and said,
"A box of secrets, my dear Watson. A box of deep, dark secrets."
Are they the records of your early cases, Holmes?
Yes, my boy. These were all done before my biographer had come to glorify me.
I've often wished that I had the notes on them.
So that you might transmute my little adventures into those rather florid stories of yours?
My stories aren't florid. They're factual accounts of what happened.
Oh, don't be hurt, my dear fellow. It's
It's
much too early in the day. Well, Watson, perhaps someday the world will hear of these cases. They're not all successes, but there are some pretty little problems among them.
I'm sure there are.
For example, here's the record of the Tarleton murders. And here's the case of Banbury, the wine merchant.
What happened to him?
He died, Watson, under peculiarly horrible circumstances.
Oh, really?
That case was one of my failures, I'm afraid. Aha! This adventure was really a little recherche. It's a full account of Ricoletti of the clubfoot and his abominable wife.
Yes, I vaguely remember her dreadful woman.
Ghosts from the past, Watson. Ghosts to remind me that my heyday's long past.
Rubbish. I'm quite sure that if a case were to present itself at this moment, you'd be totally unable to resist it.
You're wrong, old chap. Look at this note. Derived just before you came downstairs. Mr. Manderby, the local squire, apparently needs my help. And yet I assure you I'm not in the least tempted to give it to him.
Oh, may I see it?
Certainly. Here.
Let's have a look. Dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I need your help desperately. Have the goodness to call on me as soon as convenience permits. Continued theft of chickens may appear to be a small matter. Chickens, good gracious me. But I assure you that there are sinister forces at work. Asking you to catch a chicken thief. Well, really, Holmes.
Yes, Watson. Chickens. Something of a come-down, isn't it?
Well, do you know this, Mr. Manderby?
No. But surely his handwriting gives you a clue to his character.
Well, it's legible and regular. A man of business habits, I should say, and of some force of character.
No, Watson.
Oh, sorry?
Look at his long letters. They hardly rise above the common herd. That D might be an A, and the L an E. Men of character always differentiate their long letters, however illegibly they may write. There's vacillation in his K's and self-esteem in his capitals.
That's amazing, Holmes.
It's elementary, my dear Watson, and our long association together should remind you of the fact. I'm afraid you're getting rusty.
Well, perhaps you're getting rusty too, Holmes, and since the sun is shining, and this letter comes from a neighbor of yours, it might be rather interesting to...
Call on Mr. Manderby.
Exactly. I'd like to see if your analysis of his character matches the gentleman himself. In any case, Holmes, he may really be in trouble, you know.
Watson, you're like an old war horse hearing a nearly forgotten bugle.
Yeah, I dare say, Holmes. But even for stolen chickens, it's good to be in harness with you again.
When that wistful tone creeps into your voice, I can't refuse you, Watson. Very well. Let's stroll across the downs and investigate the mystery of Mr. Manderby's chickens.
Mr.
Holmes. I'm glad you and your friend came here so promptly.
It would seem to me, Mr. Manderby, that your wisest course would have been to call in the local police.
I did. And the idiot scoffed at me.
Indeed, Mr. Manderby. Why?
Well, they said if they had to track down all the chicken thieves in these parts, they'd have no time for their more important duties.
I must admit that I can follow their reasoning, sir.
Well, I can't, since they seem to spend most of their time playing skittles in the Star and Garter. The local sergeant appears to have been selected for his complete lack of grey matter. Hasn't one iota of imagination. He's unable to see in what respect this differs from an ordinary chicken theft.
Well, in what way does it differ, Mr. Manderby?
Well, the chicken coops were broken into with considerable ingenuity. The thief could have taken all he could carry. But he stole only one chicken, a white cockerel.
A white cockerel? When did this take place?
Early last evening. That was when I sent my note to you, Mr. Holmes. But in the early hours of this morning, a burglar broke into the house itself.
And what was stolen this time?
Again, the thief took only one object. My daughter's hairbrush.
Does your daughter know of these thefts?
No, I didn't tell her. The child's full enough of peculiar fancies as it is.
A white cockerel and a hairbrush. Mr. Manderby, I came here against my better judgment, but thank heaven I did. Please let me talk to your daughter at once. Unless I'm very much mistaken, there's devil's work afoot.
Alicia's playing in the drawing room. I'll take you in.
I think, if you don't mind, Mr. Manderby, that we would prefer to see her alone.
Rubbish. What could you possibly wish to say to my daughter that you couldn't say in front of me?
Well, since my friend has been kind enough to help you, sir, I think you'd better let him conduct his investigation in his own manner.
Oh, very, very, very well. All sounds unnecessarily mysterious to me. I'll be in my study.
Dreadfully pompous fellow. You were right in your analysis of his character, Holmes. Well, let's go in.
Shh. Listen to the piano, Watson.
What a weird tune.
Yes. An odd, primitive melody to hear in the heart of the English countryside. Very curious.
Come in. I'm sorry, Father. Oh, it isn't Father. Who are you, gentlemen?
Miss Manderby, permit me to introduce myself. My name is Sherlock Holmes, and this is my friend, Dr. Watson.
How do you do, my dear?
Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I knew you lived in the neighborhood. Why are you here?
At your father's request.
Oh, nothing's wrong, is it, Mr. Holmes?
I'm not sure, Miss Manderby. That's why we've come to talk to you.
Oh, may we sit down, my dear?
Oh, yes, of course. Please forgive me.
Thank you, sir.
You play the piano excellently, Miss Manderby. Have you ever thought of concert work?
Concert work? Oh, no, sir. Papa'd never allow it. He needs me here all the time.
You don't see many people here at the house.
No, Dr. Watson. Papa doesn't like me to cultivate any friends. He wishes me to devote all my attention to him.
Extremely selfish and medieval point of view, it would seem to me.
Oh, please, Mr. Holmes, you mustn't say anything against Papa. If he knew that we were talking about him, he'd be furious.
Then let me confine myself to you, Miss Manderby. Do you know of anyone in this neighborhood who might wish you serious harm?
Oh, no. No, I don't. As I told you, I hardly know anyone.
Then why, my dear young lady, are you so obviously terrified of your own shadow?
Oh, please don't ask me that. I haven't even had the courage to tell Papa.
Possibly not, my dear, but Mr. Holmes is here to help you and to protect you. That's why he insisted on our seeing you alone.
Yes, Miss Manderby. And a trouble shared, you know.
Very well, Mr. Holmes. I will tell you. I've got to tell someone. Last night I had a ghastly dream. I dreamed that I was in some foreign country, in the jungle. I was tied to a stone slab, and a group of natives danced around me, waving knives. And they were all wearing terrifying masks.
Oh, my dear, it sounds like too much lobster for supper.
Quiet, Watson.
Oh, sorry.
Please continue, Miss Manderby.
All the time I could hear a strange, haunting pipe playing in the background. Sounded like some sort of flute, and there was a drum beating out a slow, rhythmic beat.
The same rhythm that you were playing on the piano as we came in?
Why, yes. It's been haunting me ever since I awakened this morning. It goes like this. Suddenly, Mr. Holmes, I awakened from the nightmare, but I could still hear the melody continuing. I went to the window, and in the moonlight, I saw a tall man walking below.
Could you recognize him?
No, Mr. Holmes. He was disappearing through the shrubbery, and his back was turned. But his hands were raised to his mouth. And I could hear the same melody being played on some kind of flute. It was awful, awful.
You haven't told your father about it?
No, Dr. Watson. He wouldn't have believed me. Papa's always accusing me of being fanciful. Oh, but I'm not. Really, I'm not.
Miss Manderby, I'm glad that you've told us this, though I suggest that you continue to keep the incident a secret from your father.
Very well, Mr. Holmes.
Come on, Watson.
All right, Holmes. Goodbye, my dear, and courage, Miss Manderby. You have friends now.
Good day, gentlemen. I thank you.
Holmes, what the devil's all this about?
When I can answer that question, Watson, the case will be solved. As it is, there's work to be done.
Ah, there you are, Holmes.
Yes, Mr. Manderby. Here we are.
Yeah, I hope you found out what's wrong with the lassie. She hasn't been herself today.
A change from her normal self, where you are concerned, might be a benefit, sir.
Yes, indeed. The poor girl seems completely terrified of you, sir.
The problem of my daughter's relationship with her father is no possible concern of yours. I asked you here on a simple matter of detection.
Detection, yes, but far from simple. I warn you, you're in serious danger of the loss of a great deal more than a white cockerel and a hairbrush. Be on your guard, Mr. Manderby. Dr. Watson and I must conduct a little investigation in the village. You may expect a call from us later in the day. Well, Watson, here we are at Larches.
Charming house, but I still don't see quite why we're here.
Because my inquiries uncovered the fact that this is the only house in the neighborhood with relatively new tenants. When something extraordinary happens in the peaceful countryside, look first for a newcomer. The owner's name is Mr. George Shapley. Let's see what information the gentleman can give us.
Listen to that, Holmes. Sounds like a flute.
Yes, Watson. And the melody is the same that Miss Manderby played for us on the piano.
And this house is only a stone's throw away from hers.
Precisely.
Yes, gentlemen.
Mr. Shapley?
Yes?
My name is Holmes, and this is my friend, Dr. Watson.
How do you do, sir?
How are you, Doctor? What can I do for you, gentlemen?
I'm something of a student of music. We were walking past your house, and I heard what sounded like a flute playing a strange melody.
It seemed to come from the direction of the stables over there.
Oh, that. It's my manservant, Harker. He's a West Indian. Brought him over with me from Trinidad. He's quite a musician. In an amateur sort of way, you know.
I wonder if I might speak to him.
Of course you can, Mr. Holmes. I'll walk you over there.
Thank you. We were thinking of getting up a little entertainment in the village for the church ladies' bazaar. Perhaps your man would consider contributing his services.
You can ask him. He spends 2 or 3 hours a day out here practicing. Harker!
Yes?
Come here a minute.
Yes, Mr. Shapley.
These gentlemen heard you playing and wondered if you'd like to do something for some village concert or other.
Oh, that's flattering.
We're organizing a musical soiree for the church ladies in a few weeks.
Yes, my man, and we'd like you to play for us.
I'm only an amateur, but I'll be very glad to help, gentlemen.
That instrument you were playing, it had an odd quality. Was it a flute?
Yes, sir, though I doubt if you've ever seen one like it. Look for yourself.
Good Lord. Looks as if it's made of bone.
It is, sir, from a human leg bone.
Really?
It's about 200 years old and originally came from Brazil. It's quite a collector's item.
I'm sure it is. Tell me, Harker, since you're from the West Indies and obviously a lover of music, I presume you're familiar with some of the primitive melodies indigenous to that part of the world? Some of the tribal chants, for instance?
Oh, yes, sir. I know many of them.
Perhaps you'd play some at the concert.
I'd rather not, sir. Primitive chants are dangerous medicine. and that evil powers are not appreciated or understood.
I quite agree with you, Harker. Well, I'm much obliged to you, and we shall count on you for the concert. Good day to you both. Come on, Watson.
Good day.
Good day, Mr. Holmes.
Dr. Watson.
That servant's our man, Holmes. He lives within 2 houses of Miss Manderby, and he plays the flute.
Well, Watson, though I don't think the pattern is remotely as clear as you think, I'll agree that suspicion would seem to focus on the servant Harker. I could even produce another clue that points to him.
You could?
I picked this object from his coat as he turned to you during the conversation. None of you noticed it.
What is it?
Look for yourself, Watson. Here.
Great heavens! It's a feather from a white cockerel. Holmes, I thought you said we were going back to Mr. Manderby's house before the day is over.
We are, Watson.
Why are we back here at your bee farm? It's 8:30 in the evening now.
We shall call on Mr. Manderby before long. My investigations are complete. What luck did you have with
I
yours?
did as you told me and made exhaustive inquiries in the village.
With what results?
I couldn't find out much about Mr. Shapley. Nobody knows anything about the man except that he has a foreign manservant and that he paid cash for his house and deposited a large sum of money in the local bank. What did you discover? I see that you've been up to your ears in reference books.
Yes, Watson. Books concerning the peculiarly revolting ceremonies connected with voodooism.
Voodooism? That's black magic.
But flourishing in our English countryside, apparently. A white cockerel is the second finest sacrifice in voodoo magic associated with the West Indian charms.
That accounts for the first theft. How about the stolen hairbrush?
In all such magic, the possession of intensely personal objects, particularly human hair, is considered to give great supernatural powers over that person.
Then it's obvious that West Indian servant is trying to get power over Miss Manderby. Holmes, you spoke of a white cockerel being the second finest sacrifice. What is the first?
A human sacrifice. The sacrifice of a young girl.
Great Scott.
And tomorrow night the moon is full. I think that tonight the girl should be safe, though of course we'll go over there at once.
Look, Holmes, the lights of a carriage are coming up your driveway.
And it's no social call. It's driving at a gallop. Come on, Watson.
I have nothing that's happened to Miss Manderby already before we get her.
Who is it? What's wrong?
It's Robert Manderby.
What's happened, Mr. Manderby?
Alicia, my daughter, she's disappeared. The whole neighborhood's searching for her. For heaven's sake, both of you come at once.
We'll find out in a moment what Sherlock Holmes decides to do now. But first, men, why not start today and take better care of the hair you've got? Remember, one of the first requisites of handsome, healthy-looking hair is a hygienic scalp. So why settle for just any hairdressing when you can enjoy the extra advantages of a highly specialized hair tonic like Kreml? Kreml contains a special combination of hair grooming ingredients which is found in no other hair tonic. This is why it keeps unruly hair neatly in place longer, with a rich, healthy-looking luster. Yet Kreml never gives hair that cheap, greasy, patent leather look. It never leaves hair feeling sticky, gummy, or dirty. Your hair and scalp always look and feel so clean with Kreml. And if your hair is so dry it breaks and falls when you comb it, start using Kreml at once. Let it make your hair feel softer, more pliable, and look as if it had some body to it. Kreml is also fine to lubricate a dry scalp. At the same time, it removes dandruff flakes. A quick massage with Kreml helps stimulate the cutaneous circulation of the scalp. Notice how alive, how invigorated your scalp feels. So for better groomed hair, a hygienic scalp, use Kreml daily. K-R-E-M-L. Kreml Hair Tonic. Well, Dr. Watson, what happened next? You and the great Sherlock Holmes drove over to Mr. Manderby's house, I suppose.
Yes, Mr. Bell, as fast as the pony and trap could carry us there. When we arrived, Manderby quickly led us to the shrubbery beneath his daughter's window.
Yes, you can see how the fiend got into the house, Mr. Holmes.
By climbing this trellis work. Footprints in the earth leading toward it, but none leaving.
And the man, whoever he was, must have left the house by some other exit.
An amazing deduction, Watson.
There's no need to be sarcastic. Holmes, we should go over to Shapley's house at once. It's obvious that that's where the danger lies.
Before saying that anything is obvious, Watson, I'd like your help in trying an experiment.
Yes, of course, Holmes. Well, what is it?
Try climbing that trellis for me, will you?
You give me all the best jobs, don't you? Let me hand, will you, old fellow?
Here you are. Up you go.
You know, Holmes, it seems to me you're wasting valuable time.
Mr. Manderby, since you asked my help, I suggest you let me handle the case in my own way.
Holmes, I don't think this trellis is going to hold my weight. No. Look out, Holmes! Oh!
Bravo, Watson. Your test has been invaluable.
What do you mean it's been invaluable? I think I've broken my back.
I'm sure you'll survive. Come on, old chap. Get on your feet. We'll go over to Mr. Shapley's house at once. I only hope we're not too late to prevent a tragedy.
There's a light coming from the stables, Holmes.
Music, too. Listen.
It's that West Indian playing his devilish chant again.
Faster, Watson.
Look! There's someone standing in the shadows by the harness room there.
It's Mr. Shapley. Good evening, sir.
Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank heavens you're here.
What's wrong, Mr. Shapley?
Look in that empty stall there. You can see through the broken plank in the wall. The one where the music's coming from.
Good heavens. Look, Holmes. There's Miss Manderby lying on the floor unconscious.
Yes, with a dead white cockerel beside her, and a fire smoldering in the corner.
And to think that servant of mine's in there playing his filthy music.
I don't see him.
Mr. Holmes, I've got a revolver. I'm going in to get him.
I think we'll come with you, Mr. Shapley.
No. He's my servant. I'll take care of him myself.
After him, Watson. Give me that revolver. Give it to me, I say.
What do you think you're doing, Mr. Holmes?
I told you, you knocked the revolver right off his hand.
Pick it up, Watson. I have a profound dislike for seeing murder committed under my very eyes.
Murder? But the potential murderer is Harker, the servant.
Indeed. Then why is his unconscious body lying in the corner there?
It can't be. The music's still playing. That's his flute.
Yes, and it's accompanied by a drum. A remarkable feat even for a man not lying unconscious on the floor. The music is undoubtedly that of a gramophone. You're remarkably quiet, Mr. Harker.
Of course he is. He's unconscious.
My dear Watson, you're overlooking an important fact. It's a case of identity. The West Indian gentleman lying on the floor is the master, Mr. Shapley. This man is the servant, Harker. No, you don't. Grab him, Watson.
I've got him, Holmes.
Let go of me. You can't prove anything.
I can and I will. You'll go to prison for this night's work. Watson, see what may be done to arrive at the houses, while I turn this man over to the police. How is Miss Manderby, Watson?
She's going to be all right, Holmes. I took her home to her father's and left instructions for her care. How are you feeling, Shapley?
Fine, thank you, Dr. Watson. But I'm waiting for Mr. Holmes to explain this night's happenings to me.
So am I, as usual.
Then let me analyze this singular affair in its logical progression. I early concluded that you, Mr. Shapley, were the master, and the other man was the servant.
Right, Mr. Holmes, but I didn't know how you knew it.
Your speech and manner suggested nothing else. You reversed roles, I imagine, because it was an easier way to rent a house in the English countryside.
That was the reason, Mr. Holmes. In my previous visits, I've discerned a certain prejudice against foreigners.
That's a shocking thing, but I wouldn't doubt it, Mr. Shapley. You decided to live here for your health, I suppose?
No, Doctor. I came to the English countryside for peace. Peace to conclude my studies on the origin and history of West Indian native music.
I see.
I've been working in close conjunction with Professor Griffiths of the Brighton College of Anthropology. It was he who concerned me to make graphophone records my works with a view to recording them for musical archives.
And your servant saw his advantage. When you decided to change identities, he realized that if he disposed of you, he would be able to continue in his false character as the supposed Mr. Shapley. He could have taken over your large bank balance and retired under yet a third name with the proceeds.
And then he concocted this elaborate plot involving voodoo and native chants, knowing that his master would be suspect.
Precisely. He drugged his master, placed him in the incriminating trap, and then planned to burst in just ahead of us and shoot him.
But, Holmes, the white feather you found on Mr. Shapley's coat.
Undoubtedly planted there.
Mr. Holmes, I still don't see how you knew that my man was responsible.
The first clue was the trellis. It's obvious that you never climbed that. You're heavier than Dr. Watson, and it wouldn't support his weight. Your servant was a small, light man. Obviously, it was he.
Well, I see it all now. And then, of course, when we heard the music while Mr. Shapley was still lying unconscious, it was obvious that the whole thing was a plot. Oh, what a shocking business.
Yes, but I can't tell you how grateful I am to you, gentlemen. You saved my life. Mr. Holmes, I must insist on paying you a handsome fee.
A fee? No, Mr. Shapley. I couldn't dream of accepting one. Some people in my country have been sufficiently inhospitable to a foreigner to make him believe it advisable to change places with his own servant. Presumably, this was done in order to obtain tolerance and peace. Surely the least I can do is to see that his stay on these shores is a tolerable one.
Girls, I imagine most of you are planning to go out to a party or a dance on New Year's Eve, or perhaps just spend a quiet evening with friends. Naturally, you want your hair to look its best. So why not follow this beauty tip from those divinely beautiful Powers models?
We wash our hair with COCKERAL shampoo. This amazing beautifying shampoo has been especially developed to actually glamour bathe each tiny strand of hair, revealing all its natural glossy luster.
And so many women tell me how wonderful COCKERAL shampoo is for washing children's hair.
Well, you can readily see why. Because COCKERAL shampoo is so mild and gentle on the hair. Its luxurious active foam removes all loose dandruff as well as the dirt.
Girls, if only you could see how Powers model's hair fairly radiates natural glossy highlights, I'm sure you'd want to try COCKERAL shampoo right away. You can buy a bottle at any drug counter. KREML, COCKERAL shampoo. Now, Dr. Watson, what about next week?
Well, Mr. Bell, next week I think I'll tell you a story I call the Darlington Substitution Case. It's a strange story of how Holmes saved a prominent British peer from scandal and disgrace by exercising the judgment of Solomon.
Tonight's new Sherlock Holmes adventure was suggested by an incident in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's story, The Mazarin Stone. Nigel Bruce appeared by permission of California Pictures. Tom Conway through the courtesy of Eagle Lion Pictures. This is Joseph Bell speaking for COCKERAL Hair Tonic and COCKERAL Shampoo, and inviting you to be with us next week at this same time when Dr. Watson will tell us about the Darlington Substitution Case. This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company. COCKERAL Hair Tonic and COCKERAL Shampoo present the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes, starring Nigel Bruce as Dr. Watson and Tom Conway as Sherlock Holmes. Now for our weekly visit to the famous chronicler of Sherlock Holmes, our good friend, Dr. Watson. Well, Dr. Watson, how are you this evening?
Oh, in the best of spirits, Mr. Bell. Thank you, and you?
Never better, thank you. And am I correct in deducing that faded old newspaper lying upon your desk has something to do with the story you're going to tell us tonight?
Indeed, Mr. Bell. Here you are. The London Times of September the 4th, 1903. Take a look at this.
Judges summing up to jury interrupted. Sensational solution by Mr. Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, I think that you will find it equally sensational, Mr. Bell. It was one of Holmes's most dramatic cases. But first, you want a word with our listeners. Go ahead while I light up the pipe.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. Men, in summer when you go without your hat, does your hair get dry, wild, and unruly looking? After a swim, does it feel sticky and stringy? Then remember, COCKERAL Hair Tonic keeps dry, wild, sun-baked hair looking perfectly groomed throughout the hottest, stickiest day, as if your barber had just combed it. You see, COCKERAL contains a special combination of hair grooming ingredients which is found in no other hair tonic. This wonderful, natural-looking hairdressing has just enough light oil to keep hair neatly groomed with an attractive, healthy-looking luster. Yet COCKERAL never leaves the hair looking or feeling greasy or sticky. COCKERAL always looks and feels so clean on both hair and scalp. It leaves the scalp feeling so cool, so refreshed and alive. Be sure to try it, men. KREML, Kreml hair tonic. And now that I see you've got your pipe drawing to your satisfaction, Dr. Watson, how about the story you promised?
Well, Holmes and I had just returned from a long-anticipated holiday in Scotland. Mrs. Hudson greeted us with the news that a lady was at that moment awaiting us in our rooms. And as we opened the door...
Oh, Mr. Holmes, at last, thank heaven.
I beg your
You
pardon.
must save him. He didn't do it. I know he didn't. And they'll hang him. They'll hang him. No one in the world but you can help him now.
Now, my dear madam, you must control yourself. I can't possibly help you until I know your problem.
Oh, you must excuse me.
Here, my dear. You drink this. It'll make you feel better.
Oh, thank you. I've been waiting for you, Mr. Holmes, praying for your return for days. You left no forwarding address.
I know. Dr. Watson and I had promised ourselves a real holiday.
I'm Edith Fairmont. Evidently that name means nothing to you. You haven't seen the newspapers?
No, not for 4 weeks, thank heaven.
Compose yourself, madam, and tell us what has brought you here. And remember that we know nothing beyond the obvious facts that you are in great distress and, from your peril, recently widowed.
Well, I shall try to give you a clear account, Mr. Holmes. You're my one remaining hope. Some 10 years ago, I married Augustus Fairmont, a marriage which, I frankly admit, was forwarded more by my parents than by any wishes of mine. I was then only 18. Augustus was more than 20 years older than I. He was a diamond importer, and a very successful one. Our marriage was perhaps not an ideally happy one. But for 10 years, I did my best to be a good wife to Augustus.
No, my dear. Just
please continue, Mrs. Fairmont.
Easy.
About a year ago, my husband took into partnership with him a young man of 32, Charles Rossiter. During the ensuing months, Charles and I fell in love, Mr. Holmes. But I assure you that both my self-respect and Charles's high sense of honor kept us from anything more than a declaration of that love. Oh, I beg you to believe that I'm telling you the entire truth.
I'm sure you realize, Mrs. Fairmont, that is the only thing to do.
Yes, of course.
Charles wanted to discuss our problem with my husband, but I persuaded him to let me approach Augustus. But the result was as I had anticipated. Afterward, I met Charles for tea, as we'd agreed, to tell him what had happened.
Edith, my dear, I thought you'd never get here.
It was difficult, Charles, even more difficult than we expected. I hate to tell you this, my dearest.
You don't have to tell me. I knew as soon as I saw you.
Augustus refused even to discuss the possibility of giving me a divorce. You know how violent his temper is. He really frightened me.
I wish you'd let me speak to him.
I'm glad I didn't. His hatred for you is great enough as it is.
But how can he want to hold you tied to him in marriage knowing that you love me? I should think that any decent man...
Evidently you don't know Augustus very well. He has an almost abnormal sense of possession. Whatever belongs to him, he'll keep, no matter what the cost.
Very well, then. We've tried to do the right thing. Since he won't give you a divorce, there's only one thing left. Leave him. You and I will go to America or the continent and make a new life there for ourselves.
I can't, Charles. You know that I love you, but we could never find happiness in that sort of life. I want to be your wife, Charles, to have children. And since that's denied us, we must stop seeing each other. I shall always love you, dear.
Edith, you can't go out of my life like that.
There's no other way. Goodbye, my darling. That was the last meeting I had with Charles, Mr. Holmes.
I see. Go on, Mrs. Fairmont.
Well, my husband and Charles were, under the circumstances, equally anxious to dissolve their partnership. They agreed to make a final trip to Amsterdam to complete a transaction which they'd previously arranged, after which the business was to be dissolved.
How long ago was this?
A little more than a month ago. The day before they left, my husband, telling me that he was unable to find the revolver which he always carried when transporting valuable shipments of diamonds, asked me to buy him a new one. I did so, and he took it with him when he sailed. 2 days later, having completed their business in Amsterdam, Charles and my husband started back to England aboard the night boat from Flushing. My husband had with him over 10,000 pounds worth of unset diamonds which they'd purchased.
I assume, Mrs. Fairmont, that this part of your narrative is all hearsay.
What I'm telling you now, I've learned from the police. Charles and my husband had adjoining cabins on the boat. It was a foggy night in the North Sea, And about midnight, a German gentleman in the cabin adjoining my husband's, on the other side from Charles's, heard the sounds of a violent quarrel between Charles and Augustus.
Stewart! Stewart! Yes, Mr. Smith? What can I do for you? Listen to that bellowing in there. Is this a cattle boat? How can I sleep with such a verfluchte noise going on?
Oh, I'm very sorry, sir. The gentleman do seem a bit agitated, like. I'll knock on the door. I'm sorry, sir, but there's been a complaint from some of the passengers regarding the noise.
Oh, all right.
There you are, Mr. Smith. If there's any more disturbance, just ring for me.
If there is any more disturbance, I go to the captain. For an hour now I have been trying to get to sleep.
What was that?
That was a shot, you Dummkopf. Come.
It's locked.
Well, break it down.
Oh, good heavens.
That man is dead. Dead as a doornail.
It's Augustus. What's happened?
You ask what has happened? With that man dead on the floor and you in the doorway between your cabins? Here, Stewart, get the captain. I'll watch this murder until you come back.
There, Mrs. Fairmont. I can understand what a strain it must be for you to tell all this. Let me get you some aromatic...
Oh, I'm all right, Dr. Watson. Thank you.
Your husband had died instantly, Mrs. Fairmont?
So the police said, Mr. Holmes. Apparently the revolver had been fired at very close range, directly into his head. They said he must have fallen dead on the instant.
And the revolver?
Well, it was gone, Mr. Holmes. The porthole which gave onto the sea was wide open. The police, of course, say that Charles threw the revolver out of the porthole after shooting Augustus. The bullet was a .32 caliber, the same as the one I had purchased at my husband's request.
And what has Mr. Charles Rossiter to say?
Well, what is there for him to say?
Oh, quiet, Watson.
Oh, I don't blame you for thinking that Charles is guilty, Dr. Watson. Everyone in the world thinks so. But I know that he isn't. He has sworn to me that it's a complete mystery to him, and I believe him. If I didn't believe him, there'd be nothing left to live for.
The police arrested him, of course.
Oh, naturally. He goes to trial at the Old Bailey tomorrow. Oh, Mr. Holmes, you must save him. You must. You're my only hope. No one else can do it. Say that you will.
I cannot promise that, Mrs. Fairmont. I'll undertake the case, but you must understand that anything I discover, even though it may be evidence damning to Mr. Rossiter, will be turned over to the police.
That's all I ask. I know he's innocent, and I have faith that you'll prove it.
I beg you not to indulge in any false hopes, Mrs. Fairmont. I shall do my best to uncover the truth, but we have little time at our disposal. You omitted to mention what had happened to the diamonds. Were they found on your husband's person?
Oh, I almost forgot. They seemed so unimportant. The diamonds were missing, Mr. Holmes.
Huh? Missing? Oh. How do you account for that?
The police think that Charles was going to steal them, and that suddenly realizing the impossibility of the idea, he threw both them and the revolver out of the porthole.
Odd. Well, with the trial starting tomorrow, Mrs. Fairmont, Watson and I have much to do. Our first task must be a complete examination of the police records of the case. I know you'll excuse us if we hurry off, Mrs. Fairmont. Our first call must be on Mr. Charles Rossiter in prison.
And as heaven's my witness, Mr. Holmes, I've told you and Dr. Watson everything I know.
You say that you and your late partner had taken out business insurance on each other's lives?
Yes, Mr. Holmes, to the extent of £25,000 apiece.
£25,000 apiece? I say that makes it look even worse, Holmes, huh?
Unfortunately, yes. One more question, Mr. Rossiter. After the quarrel on the boat, when the steward had knocked and requested silence, you went back into your own cabin. Is that correct?
It is, Mr. Holmes.
And according to you, you heard the sound of a shot from Fairmont's cabin a moment later. How much time would you say had elapsed?
Oh, a very short interval, not more than 15 seconds at the outside.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Rossiter, I'll do what I can, but...
Oh, I know it's hopeless. I wouldn't believe the story myself if I heard it from someone else. Tell me, Dr. Watson, you're a medical man. Could I conceivably have had a lapse of memory? Could I have shot Fairmont without knowing anything about it?
Well, it seems to me almost inconceivable. I never heard of a case of amnesia or loss of memory that began and ended all in the space of a couple of minutes.
Well, come on, Watson. We must be going.
Mr. Holmes, do you think there's any chance?
Keep up your courage, Mr. Rossiter. There's always a chance. Water.
I say, Holmes, I grant you that Mrs. Fairmont's a lovely woman and that young Rossiter had a lot of provocation. But why did you tell him that there was a chance? It hardly seems cricket to me.
I told him that there was a chance, Watson, for the excellent reason that there is.
Chance of what?
Of acquitting Rossiter of a crime which he very obviously did not commit.
What do you mean to say?
Come along, Watson. We've no time to stand about arguing. Rossiter's trial opens tomorrow morning. And if we're to secure the evidence we need, you and I have our work cut out for us.
Evidence? Evidence of what?
Evidence to convince a jury. The sequence of events is obvious, but it'll require a continuous chain of proof to convince a jury of Rossiter's innocence.
Innocence? On my soul, Holmes, I think you must be mad. The prosecution has an absolutely clear-cut case, and you go on prattling about Rossiter's innocence. If Rossiter didn't shoot Augustus Fairmont, somebody must have.
Somebody did, Watson. And a devilishly clever plot he invented, too. But if we're to save Rossiter from hanging, it's up to us to prove it.
In just a moment, we'll find out if Sherlock Holmes is able to prove it. Men, on hot, sticky summer days, your hair needs extra special care. And when you buy a hair tonic, why not buy one that does lots more than keep your hair looking handsome? Why not get your money's worth and buy Kreml hair tonic? No other hair tonic keeps the hair more neatly groomed and attractive looking. Kreml gives hair such a handsome, clean-cut appearance. It keeps the hair perfectly groomed throughout the hottest, stickiest day. It never looks or feels greasy or sticky. In addition, Kreml is simply great to lubricate a dry scalp. At the same time, it removes itchy, loose dandruff and leaves the scalp feeling so clean, refreshed, and alive. No wonder Kreml is preferred among America's most prosperous men. Buy a bottle of Kreml at any drug counter. Ask for an application at your barber shop. Use this highly specialized hair tonic daily for better groomed hair, a more hygienic scalp. Kreml, Kreml hair tonic. Now, Dr. Watson, what steps did you and Sherlock Holmes take next to prove Rossiter's innocence?
Well, Holmes and I hurried to the offices of Fairmont and Rossiter in Hatton Gardens. Assisted by Fairmont's chief clerk, a little dried-up wisp of a man, we spent the next hour in an intensive study of Fairmont's old checkbook stuff.
There's no question of it, Watson. These regular payments, month after month, to Mademoiselle Elaine Dufour can only mean one thing.
Oh, I don't see why. She might have been an old nurse of his or something.
Really, Watson?
Huh?
One does not pay one's old nurse £50 a month over a period of years.
Oh, that's all right.
Thank heaven we found Mademoiselle Dufour's address.
Why?
Because you're leaving for Paris tonight.
Huh?
And I want you to bring back Mademoiselle Dufour no matter what means you use to persuade her.
Oh, really, Holmes? What are you going to do? Be doing while I'm off on this wild goose chase?
I have a few things to look into, Watson. Quite a few things. And you performed the post-mortem yourself, Dr. McPherson?
I did, Mr. Holmes. And I'm prepared to stake my professional reputation that Augustus Fairmont would have been dead within a year, no matter what had been done. That disease had progressed too far for surgeries to be any use whatsoever.
You told the police this, of course.
Oh, naturally. They weren't interested. All they cared about was the bullet which finished the fellow off.
Of course, you understand, Mr. Holmes, that after the police had finished, this cabin was all straightened up. New carpet on the floor, everything ship-shape.
Quite. And Mr. Fairmont's body was lying right here. Is that right, Stewart?
It was indeed, sir, and a fair turn he'd given me, with half his head blown off.
And this cabin and the adjoining one, occupied by Mr. Rossiter, are identical in every way?
Yes, sir.
Ah, I'd hoped to find something like this.
What was that, sir?
Take a good look at this, Stewart. I may need your evidence in court for this rather deep nick here in the lower part of the brass rim of the porthole.
Oh, I see the nick all right, said it. I'm blasted if I can measure...
Just tell me one thing. After the tragedy, was any heavy object missing from Mr. Fairmont's cabin? Something heavy but fairly small?
That's a queer thing, sir, now that you come to mention it. I reported to the chief steward that the heavy glass water bottle was gone when the police let me straighten up the cabin. But I didn't think nothing of it at the time, so that maybe it got smashed in all the confusion.
Thank you, steward. Thank you very much indeed.
And you asked me to come back to England with you, Dr. Watson?
Yeah, I do indeed, Mademoiselle Dufour.
To go into court and tell everything? I know nothing about your English laws. Perhaps I render myself liable to prosecution. All this for the sake of a man whom I have never seen.
Not only for his sake, mademoiselle, but also for the sake of the woman who loves him. And, most important of all, for the sake of right and justice. To save a man from hanging for a crime that he did not commit. There's no way in which I can force you to come with me. I can only most earnestly beg you to do what we both know is the right thing.
And in the final analysis, members of the jury, I must remind you that the decision as to Charles Rossiter's guilt or innocence rests solely with you. Under the law, my province as judge is merely to assist you in reaching a just verdict. And this I have endeavored to do by summing up for you the evidence to which we have been listening during these last 3 days. The prosecution has endeavored to prove to you that this man, who has not denied his love for Mrs. Fairmont, knew that they could never be together so long as her husband should live. You have heard the evidence of their quarrel on the boat, of the shooting, and of the scene found by Mr. Schmidt, the steward, and the other witnesses when the door to the cabin was broken down. You have heard the suggestion of premeditation in the purchase of the weapon by Mrs. Fairmont, a weapon which, though missing, was of identical caliber with the bullet which killed her husband. You have heard the prisoner's protestations of innocence and his own inability to offer any logical explanation of the tragedy. Under these circumstances,
My lord, I beg leave to interrupt.
Well, Sir Aubrey, what is it you want to say?
During the entire trial, my lord, my client and I have put our hopes in an investigation being conducted by the eminent criminologist, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Mr. Holmes has just arrived in court, together with his colleague, Dr. Watson, who has brought with him from Paris a witness whose evidence is vital to the defense. I respectfully beg your lordship's permission, and that of the prosecution, to allow Mr. Holmes to tell us what he has discovered.
It is most irregular, Sir Aubrey, but the primary concern of this court is that justice be done. In view of Mr. Sherlock Holmes' distinguished record and many services to the law, I see no objection to granting your request.
Thank you, my lord. I assure you that we would not have waited till so late in this trial to present our evidence had it not been for the fact that Dr. Watson has only at this moment arrived from Paris, escorting a lady who is the final link in that chain of evidence.
Proceed, Mr. Holmes.
The late Augustus Fairmont, married to a woman more than 20 years his junior, was a man with a very great sense of possession. Whether or not he loved his wife, he was determined that no one else should have her. And when his wife freely and honestly confronted him with her admission that she loved another man, Fairmont could think of nothing but revenge.
I'm willing to allow you a fair amount of latitude, Mr. Holmes, but this seems to have no bearing on the case.
With your lordship's permission, I hope to establish its bearing in just a moment. I have here in court Dr. Macpherson, who conducted the post-mortem upon the late Mr. Fairmont. Dr. Macpherson will testify that Augustus Fairmont was suffering from an incurable disease which would unquestionably have killed him within another year.
Silence in the court.
Also in court and ready to testify is Sir Edward Penrose of Harley Street, to whom Augustus Fairmont went for an opinion just a little more than 6 weeks ago. Sir Edward informed Fairmont who had never before suspected the presence of this disease, that he would be lucky if he lived for 6 months, and that there was nothing to be done. Now, Fairmont, faced with the knowledge that he would die, probably painfully and lingeringly, within a few months at most. And the bitterness of this knowledge must have been increased 100-fold by the realization that his death would remove the last barrier to the wedding of these two people who loved each other.
Bravo, Holmes. Quiet in the court. Oh, sir.
Then Augustus Fairmont evolved in his twisted mind a perfect plot. He would die, not lingeringly and painfully, but instantly. And in dying, he would make sure that Charles Rossiter, the man he hated, would be hanged for his murder. With his partner, Rossiter, Fairmont sailed to Amsterdam. But when he had purchased some 10,000 pounds worth of diamonds, the thought crossed his mind of making a final provision for the woman whom, for many years, he'd been seeing in France. She's here now, due to Dr. Watson. And I will ask her to rise. Mademoiselle Dufour, is it not true that Mr. Fairmont provided for you during the last 6 or 7 years, and that he visited you frequently during his trips to the continent?
That is correct, Mr. Holmes.
Now, will you please tell the court what you received in the mail from Mr. Fairmont the day after you read of his death?
I received a package containing a small fortune in unset diamonds, together with a letter from Auguste, saying that I would not hear from him again, that I should make no inquiries concerning him, and that these diamonds would provide me with sufficient funds for the rest of my life.
Thank you very much, Mademoiselle Dufour.
Quiet in the courtroom.
I think that will be all.
Oh, magnificent, my dear. I'm very, very proud of you. Well done. Very well done.
Provided for the woman with whom he had so long a friendship. He did this with the knowledge that he was to die that very night. On board the boat, he purposely entered into a noisy argument with young Rossiter, an argument which ended with the steward knocking on the door. A moment later, Rossiter returned to his own cabin and shut the communicating door. The instant he had done so, Fairmont took from its place of concealment the revolver which, with studied malice, he had caused his wife to buy. This revolver Fairmont had previously prepared for what he was about to do by tying a stout string from its trigger guard to the heavy glass water bottle he had taken from his cabin wall. It was the work of but a moment, after Rossiter had closed the door, to suspend the heavy bottle outside the porthole which gave directly upon the sea. Then Fairmont raised the revolver to his head and pulled the trigger. As he fell dead, the revolver, released from his hand, was pulled sharply up and out of the porthole by the heavy weight of the bottle. It hit the edge of the porthole, nicking the brass rim, and then disappeared forever into the depths of the North Sea.
Unless this demonstration is stopped instantly, I shall have the courtroom cleared.
My lord, in view of the evidence offered by Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the Crown withdraws its charge against Charles Rossiter.
Oh, great work, Holmes. Great work. You brought it off, old man.
I never could have, Watson, if you hadn't been persuasive enough to get Mademoiselle Dufour here in time.
Good to say so, boy. Ah, look. Here comes Mrs. Fairmont.
Oh, God bless you, Mr. Holmes. And you too, Dr. Watson. Oh, I've got to kiss you both.
Oh, that's very nice of you. Upon my word, that's the nicest fee we've ever had.
Now, friends, our guest star, one of the greatest authorities on feminine beauty, that king of glamour, John Robert Powers. And you know, Mr. Powers is famous for his $1 million Powers models. Gorgeous girls you often see on magazine covers, in the movies, in exclusive fashion shows. Ladies and gentlemen, by special transcription, Mr. John Robert Powers.
Good evening, friends. I have a little surprise for you this evening, as I brought along one of my most attractive Powers girls of all times, Ellen Allardyce. And perhaps we can get Ellen to tell us how she keeps her hair so bright and shining. Will you, Ellen?
I owe all that to you, Mr. Powers. Do you remember how you told me to always wash my hair with Kreml shampoo?
I certainly do, Ellen. I tell all my Powers girls to use Kreml shampoo. I'm thoroughly convinced that no other shampoo leaves the hair more radiant with such natural, brilliant luster. And Kreml shampoo keeps it that way for days.
What I like about Kreml shampoo is that it never dries the hair.
That's right, Ellen, because Kreml shampoo has a built-in oil base. This oil base actually helps keep the hair from becoming dry and brittle.
I know it. Kreml shampoo always leaves the hair so much silkier with a lovely natural satin sheen. And I love the way Kreml shampoo whips up just lots and lots of luxuriant active foam, even in the hardest water.
Ellen, I think every girl owes it to herself to try Kreml shampoo. I feel certain she'll be in for one of the greatest beauty thrills of her life. Because without a doubt, in all my years spent in helping women become more attractive, I've never come across a more beautifying shampoo than Kreml shampoo.
Many, many thanks to you, Mr. Powers, and to your very lovely Powers model, Miss Ellen Allardyce. Now, Dr. Watson, what about next week?
Well, now, let me see. Next week, in answer to many requests, I think I shall tell you about the most gruesome and most horrifying experience that Holmes and I ever had. It concerns the frightening happenings at Stoke Moran, the home of Dr. Grimesby Roylott, and tells how Holmes solved the mystery of the death of one of Dr. Roylott's two daughters and prevented the murder of the other. I call it The Adventure of the Speckled Band.
Tonight's new Sherlock Holmes adventure was suggested by an incident in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's story, The Problem of Thor Bridge. Nigel Bruce appeared by permission of Universal International Pictures. Tom Conway through the courtesy of Eagle Lion Pictures. The Sherlock Holmes series is produced by Tom McKnight, with original music composed and conducted by Alex Steinert. This is Joseph Bell speaking for Kreml Hair Tonic and Kreml Shampoo, and inviting you to be with us next week at this same time. And Dr. Watson will tell us about the adventure of the Speckled Band. This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.
The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, starring Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce. The makers of Grove's bromoquinine tablets bring you another adventure of Sherlock Holmes, with Basil Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes and Nigel Bruce as Dr. Watson. A cold is a miserable thing. A cold may become a dangerous thing. Even a so-called light cold can take a serious turn. Be prompt, be decisive in your treatment of a cold. At the very first sign of a cold, take Grove's bromoquinine tablets. Bromoquinine tablets quickly check the symptoms of a cold, quickly relieve the distress of a cold. They give you speedy results, which are very important. Don't monkey around when you can get such a dependable preparation as Grove's bromoquinine tablets. And now, here we are again on our usual visit to Dr. Watson. He's waiting for us in his study, a cheerful blaze crackling on the hearth.
I'm very relieved to see you, Mr. Manning. Hasn't the weather been atrocious today? I was beginning to wonder if you'd be able to get here tonight through all this fog.
Yes, it certainly is what you Londoners call a regular pea super.
Yes, indeed. It reminds me of the adventure of the missing submarine plans. A case that was solved in the underground.
Underground?
What you Americans call a subway.
Yes, but what has a solution in a subway got to do with a foggy night?
Well, you see, the affair started in weather exactly like this. It was the third week in November, the year 1895, to be exact. On Monday, a dense yellow fog had settled down upon London. On Thursday, it was still there, thicker and murkier than ever. At first, Holmes had turned his nervous energy to cross-indexing his huge reference books. But when, after pushing our breakfast chairs back for the fourth morning, we saw the greasy brown swirl still drifting past the windows, Holmes's patience snapped. Holmes, if you must pace around in circles, I wish you'd change directions now and then. You're making me dizzy.
Bah, it's inexcusable, Watson, inexcusable. No initiative, no imagination. Nothing ever gets done.
If you're alluding to the inactivity in this last session of Parliament, my dear Holmes...
I'm not speaking of our lawmakers, Watson, but of our lawbreakers. The London criminal is certainly a dull fellow.
What makes you say that?
Well, look out of the window. Ideal weather for committing a crime. The criminal advances on his intended victim practically unseen. He pounces and disappears into thin air.
There have been numerous petty thefts, I believe.
Petty thefts, pickpockets, ragamuffins. What's the country coming to? Now, if I were a criminal, Watson...
Well, I, for one, would move to America.
Hello. Mrs. Hudson's knocking. Excited. What's up, I wonder? Yes, Mrs. Hudson, what is it? Oh, a telegram for me.
Yes, sir.
Very well, thank you.
Oh, well, what's it say?
Oh, wait until I open it, can't you? Ah, dear me, what next? Most unusual, Watson, most unusual.
What's most unusual, Watson? What's it say?
Well, it's from my brother, Mycroft. You remember him. He helped us solve the case of the Greek interpreter. He's coming here.
Why not? What's so phenomenal about that?
Why not? Why not, indeed? It's as startling as it would be to meet a tram car coming down a country lane. Yes, now I come to think of it, Mycroft is rather like a tram car. His rails lead from his Pall Mall lodgings to the Diogenes Club in Whitehall. That's his circle. I wonder what upheaval could have derailed him.
Doesn't the telegram explain?
It says, must see you about Cadogan West, coming at once.
Cadogan West? Cadogan West? Why, that's the young chap who's found dead in the underground on Tuesday morning. I remember reading about it in the papers.
Oh?
The young man had apparently fallen out of a train and killed himself. He hadn't been robbed, and there was no reason to suspect violence. Quite an uninteresting case, if I remember correctly.
And yet, it's serious enough to cause Mycroft to alter his habits. No, Watson, this must be an extraordinary event. Do you recall any other facts about the affair?
Yes, I come to think of it, there was one unusual bit came out of the inquest. They were unable to ascertain at what point he entered the train, because his ticket was missing.
Strange. What articles were found on the body?
£2.15, I believe it was, a checkbook and... Oh, yes, 2 dress circle tickets for the Woolwich Theatre, dated for that evening.
Theatre tickets, eh? Then it wasn't suicide. A man doesn't procure theatre tickets for the evening on which he intends to end his life. Anything else?
A small packet of technical papers, I believe.
Technical papers? What kind of technical papers?
The newspapers didn't say.
As serious as that. What did the young man do? Where was he employed?
He was a clerk at Woolwich Arsenal.
Government employ. There we have it, Watson. British government, Woolwich Arsenal, technical papers. That's why Mycroft is involved in this affair.
I don't understand.
No, I suppose not. Watson, have I ever told you what Mycroft is?
Your brother, of course.
Oh, no, Watson. Do you have to be so dense? I mean, do you know what he does?
I seem to have some vague recollection that you once told me that he'd held some small office under the British government.
It would be more accurate to say, in a way, that he is the British government.
What?
His position is unique. He made it for himself. As the tidiest and most orderly brain of any man alive. Great capacity for storing facts and giving them the proper interpretation. The conclusions of every government department are passed on to him. He's the central exchange, the clearinghouse. Again and again, his word has decided the national policy. He thinks of nothing else. Nothing else can lure him from his contemplations.
And yet he's coming here.
Yes, Jupiter is descending on us today.
What on earth can happen?
Watson, that sounds suspiciously like a bad pun. Here he is, if I'm not mistaken. To speak for himself. Come in. Hello, Mycroft. What's up? You look flustered.
Most annoying business, Sherlock, most annoying. You know how I dislike altering my habits. Extremely awkward for me to come away from the office, particularly with Siam in its present state. Oh, dear me.
Yeah, sit down, Mycroft, sit down. You know Watson, of course.
Yes, of course. I'm trying to find a chair that I can trust to hold me.
I'd better take the sofa. You certainly haven't got any thinner.
I've never seen the Prime Minister so upset. As for the Admiralty, it's buzzing like an upset beehive. You know anything about the case?
Watson's just been telling me what was in the newspapers. Just what were the technical papers found on the body?
Sherlock, for the love of heaven, not so loud. Those papers which the wretched youth had in his pocket were none other than the plans of the Bruce Partington submarine.
Oh?
The submarine which will completely revolutionize naval warfare. The most important papers in our government archives. Under no circumstances could they be removed from the office. Even the chief constructor of the Navy was forced to go to Woolwich if he desired to consult them.
And yet we find them in the pockets of a dead junior clerk in the heart of London. Yeah, from an official point of view, it's deplorable, my dear Mycroft. Simply deplorable.
You may not, Sherlock, but this country won't be safe until they are recovered.
But I thought you said that they were found in the pocket of this chap, Cadogan West.
10 papers taken from Woolwich. 7 were found in the pockets of Cadogan West. 3 are still missing, the 3 essential ones. To recover those 3 papers is imperative. The peace of Europe depends on them.
Nice little problem, eh, Watson? Why did Cadogan West take the papers? How did he die? How did his body reach the place where it was found? And where are the missing papers?
Find the answer to those questions, Sherlock, and you'll have done your country an invaluable service.
Oh, why don't you solve it yourself, Mycroft? I believe you could.
Possibly. But it's a question of digging out details. Give me the details, and I can give you the solution from an armchair. No, when it comes to running about and cross-questioning railway guards and lying on one's face with a lens to one's eye, no, it's not my métier.
Besides, your figure prevents your taking such an undignified position, eh? Very well. Leave that part of it to us, eh, Watson?
Right you are.
Good. I've got a cab waiting outside back to the place where the body was found. I can give you the details on the way.
Now, Mycroft, who was the official guardian of these famous papers?
No less a personage than Sir James Walter, a gentleman who's grown grey in the service. His patriotism is beyond suspicion.
A bachelor, if I'm not mistaken, lives with his brother.
Yes. He was at the house of Admiral Sinclair at Berkeley Square during the whole of the evening when this accident occurred. The hall vouches for him. He's one of the 2 who have the only keys to the safe.
And his key was with him all evening?
Right. His key, the key to the building, and the key to the room.
Who was the man with the other key?
The senior clerk, Mr. Sidney Johnson. Man of 40, married, silent, morose, with an excellent service record.
Any alibi?
He, too, had his key with him and seems to have spent the evening playing a game of draughts with the greengrocer around the corner from his lodgings. Of course, he has only the word of this greengrocer to back him up.
Oh, come, my dear Mycroft. No class discriminations, please. The word of a greengrocer is often just as good as that of an admiral. But what about Cadogan West?
He had a good reputation, a bit hot-headed, but straight and honest. At least, everyone thought so. He was next to Sidney Johnson at the office. His duties brought him into daily personal contact with the plans. No one else ever had the handling of them.
Oh, it's perfectly clear. He must have taken...
Ah, not so fast, Watson, not so fast. Who locked them up that night?
Mr. Sidney Johnson.
They were of value, commercially, I mean.
Oh, yes. There's no doubt that West could have got several thousands for them very easily.
And yet, only a small amount of money was found on the body.
Perhaps the buyer took it back after he'd murdered West.
What puzzles me is, how did West obtain possession of those papers? To do so, he must have had a false key.
Several false keys, Sherlock. He had to open the building and the room as well.
Oh, well. Several false keys, then. Let me see. Suppose West did take the papers and went into town. And on the way back to Woolwich, where he is hoping to replace the papers, he's killed and thrown from the train.
But the spot where the body was found is considerably past the station for London Bridge, which is the route to Woolwich.
That's interesting. Also, if young West did make an appointment with some foreign agent to sell the papers that night, why didn't he keep the evening clear? Why buy 2 theater tickets?
Exactly. Furthermore, he actually escorted his fiancée halfway there before he disappeared.
Blind. That's what it looks like to me.
Why did he take the papers at all? Why not copy them out in the office and sell the copies? He certainly had plenty of opportunity to do so. And why the absence of his underground ticket?
Perhaps the ticket would have shown us which station was near the agent's house. So the murderer destroyed it.
Good, Watson. Very good. And yet, I wonder.
Well, here's the underground station. The railway authorities have sent a man round to show the exact place where the body was found.
You won't change your mind with us?
Go crawling round that black hole on my hands and knees. Not very likely. Well, I shall expect a report on your efforts this evening.
Never expect too much, Mycroft. Never expect too much.
Before we follow Holmes and Watson into the mazes of the London subway system, I have a word of advice. Every year, colds cause a lot of sickness. Every year, they cause a lot of expense and time lost from work. Always regard a cold seriously. Always treat it earnestly. At the first sign of a cold, take Grove's bromoquinine tablets. Bromoquinine tablets are famous relief for the distress of a cold. Their efficacy has been fully established. Bromoquinine tablets go right to work on a cold symptom. They don't waste any time. They don't pull any punches. They quickly relieve the misery of a cold. They help reduce the fever of a cold. Thousands of people keep bromoquinine tablets handy all winter. Thousands of people depend on them as their relief for colds. No other preparation enjoys greater confidence than bromoquinine tablets. Follow the example of millions, and at the first sign of a cold, take Grove's bromoquinine tablets. Get them at any drugstore, a few cents a box. Ask specifically for Grove's, Groves, Bromo, Bromo, quinine, Quinine, Grove's bromoquinine tablets.
This way, sir. Step right along the tracks.
But it isn't safe. Supposing a train should come shooting round that curve.
Oh, that's all right, sir. There won't be another for 5 minutes anyway. Here we are, sir. This is where they found the body. Right here alongside the rails. Lying on its face it was.
Spooky old place, eh, Holmes? Like the catacombs, only without the skeletons.
Yeah. Anything in his hands when they found him?
No, sir.
Were they clenched? Or spread out as if he were protecting himself?
No, sir. There was what you might call relaxed.
Ah. What time did all this happen?
Well, sir, the train he was hoisted out as near as we can figure passed along here about midnight on Monday.
All the carriages have been examined for signs of violence, I suppose.
They didn't find nothing, not even the missing ticket. There was a passenger to Aldgate on the ordinary train. About 11:40 it was. He said he'd heard a heavy thud, like something striking the line, just before the train reached this station. But it was so foggy, he said he was blessed if he could see what it was.
Holmes, what's the matter? What are you staring at?
The curve, Watson.
What
curve
of it?
of the rails.
What of it? What do you mean?
I suppose there aren't many curves as abrupt as this.
No, sir, I can't say as there is.
What have curves to do with it?
Oh, an indication, Watson, merely an indication. Unique. Perfectly unique. And yet, why not? I don't see any indications of bleeding on the line.
No, sir, there wasn't any to speak of.
But I understand there was a considerable wound.
The bone was crashed right enough.
Holmes, do you hear that? It's a train. It's coming this way.
Run, sir. Run for your life.
Yes, yes, but where?
Up ahead. There's a place where the train switches off.
Run, Watson, run. It's just around the curve.
We'll never make it.
Yes, we will. Faster, faster.
There's the switch up ahead. Come on.
Here comes the train now.
We'll make it. Justin. Watson, for the love of heaven. You're on the wrong track.
Well, that was a narrow escape, Holmes. I must say my knees are still shaking. Look at the shoulder of my coat where you pulled it there.
Lucky thing for you that I did.
Where are we off to now in this fog?
Yes, it's a nice afternoon. Suppose we pay a few calls. I think Sir James Walter claims our first attention. After that, we might drop in on Miss Westbury.
Miss Westbury? Who's she?
She is Cadogan West's fiancée and the last person to see him alive.
Holmes, we seem to be going around in circles. We've accomplished absolutely nothing so far except to get ourselves nearly annihilated in the underground. After all, it's perfectly obvious that the young man had a quarrel with someone, in all probability the agent, to whom he sold the papers, and got himself thrown out of the railway carriage for his paying.
I disagree with you, my dear Watson. His body fell from the roof of the carriage where it had been placed. Cadogan West met his death elsewhere.
The roof of the train?
Consider the facts, Watson. A, the curve in the tracks. The body is found at a spot where the train pitches and sways as it comes around the points. B, there was no ticket. C, there were no signs of bleeding on the line because the body had bled elsewhere.
Of course, everything fits together, but where was the body placed on the train?
I think I can make a fair guess at that, my dear Watson. Here we are. This is the famous official villa of Sir James Walter. And that, if I'm not mistaken, is his brother, Lord Valentine, just coming out of the house.
What's the matter with the man? He looks positively haunted.
Oh, pardon me, Colonel Valentine, but can you tell me if Sir James is at home?
Sir James, sir? Sir James is dead.
Good heavens, dead?
He died this morning. It's terrible. Terrible.
How did he die?
Oh, it's this horrible scandal. My brother, sir, was very sensitive of his honor. He couldn't survive the disgrace to his department. It broke his heart. Pardon me, gentlemen, I must go. It broke his heart.
Most appalling development. Eh, Holmes?
I wonder if his death was natural, or if the fellow killed himself.
Yes?
Will you tell Miss Westbury that Mr. Sherlock Holmes would like to see her?
Oh, please come in, gentlemen. I'm Violet Westbury, Mr. Holmes. I've been expecting you ever since I heard you had taken the case. Please be seated.
Well, thank you.
Oh, Mr. Holmes, we must save his good name. He couldn't have done it. Cadogan was the most chivalrous, patriotic gentleman on earth. He couldn't have done it. He would have cut his right hand off rather than sell a state secret.
But the facts, my dear Miss Westbury.
I admit I can't explain them.
Was he in need of money?
No, Mr. Holmes. His needs were simple and his salary very good. He saved several £100. We were married at the New Year.
I see. Had you noticed any signs of mental excitement?
Well, that is...
Come, Miss Westbury, be frank with us.
Yes, Mr. Holmes. That night, I had a feeling that there was something on his mind.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about it, will you?
We were on the way to the theater. It was a foggy night, you remember? We were walking slowly. Our way took us close to his office. Cadogan seemed thoughtful and worried. Darling, what's the matter? You haven't said a word for the last 5 minutes. Have I said or done something?
Of course not, silly. It's just that I've got something on my mind.
Oh, why not tell me about it? Perhaps I can help.
It's no use, Vi. It's too serious for me to talk about, even to you.
You know, sometimes, Caddy, I feel just the least little bit jealous of that old job of yours when you're cooped up in that building all day.
Oh, now you're not going to be jealous of the building.
Well, not really. But it is funny to think of a husband having secrets he can't tell his wife.
Mighty important secrets, I can promise you. There's one in particular that any foreign spy would pay good money to get hold of.
How thrilling.
Well, I don't know. They're awfully slack about some things over there in that building, Violet. What's too slack? It would be too confounded easy for a traitor to get his hands on those plans.
What plans?
Never mind, darling. I guess I'm getting a bit melodramatic. But there's something been worrying me. Hello, what's that?
What's what?
Over there, that shadow moving along the side of the building. It's a man. So that's it. I always suspected...
Oh, what's the matter? You're so excited. What's wrong?
Stay here, Violet. There's something I have to find out. Stay here.
I waited and waited, but he never returned. Oh, Mr. Holmes, if you could only save his honor, it meant so much to him.
We shall do our best, Miss Westbury. This shadow, this man moving along the building. Did you see it, too?
I think I did, Mr. Holmes. But the night was so foggy, I can't be sure. But there must have been a man. Another man. It couldn't have been Cadogan. Surely character goes for something.
Let us hope so. Come along, Watson. We must return home. I'm expecting an answer to some telegrams I sent Mycroft early this afternoon. We've done enough for one day.
Holmes, where have you been all day? You left this morning before I was up. Now you've come home with your towel awry, your suit torn, and as ravenous as a wolf.
Yes, I've had a bit of exercise, my dear Watson. Pass me the tongue, will you? It would have done you good to go along.
Yes, what were you doing?
Investigating the premises inhabited by foreign spies known to have been in London on last Monday. Mycroft sent me a list of them. Took a bit of doing, too. Climbing walls, breaking into cellars, prowling around rooftops.
Well?
There was only one residence which had the proper facilities for disposing of West's body after the murder.
Well, whose residence was that?
It belongs to a Hugo Oberstein. The address is 13 Caulfield, Kensington. The gentleman himself has departed for Europe.
Gone, has he? And he took the plans with him. It's too...
Not necessary, Watson.
What can we do now?
We're going to keep a rendezvous with the gentleman who stole and sold those plans. The assignation will take place at Mr. Oberstein's house this evening at 9.
What the deuce are you talking about?
These newspaper clippings. I found them in the drawer of Hugo Oberstein's desk. Read them.
Daily Telegraph agony column. The first one says, 2 conflicts with description must have full report, terms agreed to, payable goods delivered. Signed, Piero. Piero, indeed. Sounds like a Mardi Gras.
Now, read on, Watson, read on.
Second goes, matter presses must withdraw offer unless contract completed. Piero again.
And the last, dated Monday, the day the crime was committed.
Monday night after 9, 2 taps, payment in hard cash. I say, do you think it was a submarine that the plans that he was buying?
I'm almost positive. And Pierrot was Oberstein himself. But we'll find out for certain this evening. I've invited the gentleman who sold the papers to meet us.
How? I don't understand.
I inserted this advertisement in today's Daily Telegraph. Tonight, same hour, same place, 2 taps, vitally important. Your own safety at stake. Signed, Pierrot, as usual.
By George, if he answers that, we've got him.
Unless we're too late. Come along, Watson. There's no time to lose. You can take this package for a change. I've been carrying it around all day.
What's in it?
Oh, just a jemmy, a dark lantern, a chisel, and a revolver.
Nice equipment for a respectable citizen to be carrying about the streets of London, I must say.
Yeah, you know, Watson, there are times when I suspect we aren't quite respectable. Here we are. This is Caulfield Gardens.
Thank heavens, it's still foggy. I shouldn't like to be caught in the act of housebreaking.
Yeah. Over this wall, Watson. There's a window we can easily pry open in the back.
Scale that wall?
Come on, hurry up. There's no time to lose. Here. I'll give you a boost. Come on, up here. That's it. Look out, here I come.
I must say, Holmes, you're as agile as a cat. It's uncanny.
This is the window. Light the lantern and give me the jemmy. 1, 2...
Holmes, the underground runs right past here, almost on the level of these windows. I could have reached out and touched it.
Yes, quite convenient, wasn't it? It was here the body was placed on the roof of the train. Look out of this, look on this windowsill. You can see the soot is blurred where they rested the body. And here, look here, look. This brown stain is blood.
Nasty, eh, Holmes? Let's get on to that.
Very well, then. Come along. The window's open. Easy, don't break the glass.
Supposing Oberstein should happen to return home.
Well, we must take our chances in this business. Come along, Watson, come along. Our visitor will expect to be let in by the front door.
I wish these stairs didn't squeak so.
9 o'clock. We can expect him at any moment now. You take your position on one side of the door. I'll be on the other. So we can pounce on him when he enters. I'll throw my greatcoat over his head.
I wish he'd hurry.
Shh, Watson.
What if he doesn't come?
There he is. Ready now. I'll open the door.
You wanted me?
No, you don't. Take that.
What the...
Easy, Watson, easy.
All right, Holmes, I've got him.
Well, let's take a look at our catch. Take the overcoat away, Watson.
Right. Hi, it's Colonel Valentine Walter, Sir James's brother.
Quite. Well, sir, what have you to say for yourself? Why did you steal the Bruce Partington plans?
Who are you? What do you know about this?
I am Sherlock Holmes, and I know everything.
Oh, this is terrible. I'm lost. I didn't realize their importance until my brother killed himself. But I needed the money. I had to have it. Oberstein offered to give it to me if I'd see the plans.
So you took an impression of your brother's key, opened the safe, and procured the papers. Cadogan West saw you leaving the building, followed you here, and you killed him.
No, I didn't do that. I swear I didn't do it.
No? Then perhaps you'd better tell us who did murder Cadogan West and placed him on the roof of the railway carriage.
I'll tell you. I promise you I will. I did the rest. I confess it, but not that.
Very well, then. How did it happen?
I got the papers, as you've discovered. Made my way through the fog until I reached the door. Once or twice, I fancied I was being followed. I could hear footsteps on the pavement behind me.
Colonel Walter?
Yes?
You have the papers?
Yes. Let me in, quick. I think someone's been following me.
Yes, it's me.
You can't do this, Valentine. It's treason.
Conway, do you hear?
No, you can't sell the papers, Valentine. I won't let you.
They should see.
Look out, West.
Take that. Oh. How do you like that, my impetuous young friend? Papa Oberstein, he knows how to use a blackjack, eh?
You've killed him.
So?
It's murder. I'm going to get out of this.
Oh, no. I think different. You will come in here if you do not wish to taste the blackjack, too.
But
That is better.
Oh, what can we do? They'll find the body.
I have an idea. First, I look at those papers. I take the ones I want, and the rest we put in the pocket of this foolish young man. And then we give him a nice ride on top of the underground train, no? He will be the guilty one. Who will ever know?
What a thoroughly unpleasant gentleman. What a pity that he got away with the papers, Dr. Watson.
Oh, he didn't. Oberstein had left a Paris forwarding address with Colonel Walters. That gentleman sent him a letter dictated by Holmes. saying that he had discovered that one essential detail in the plans was missing, and that he had procured a tracing which would make it complete for a price.
And did Oberstein swallow the bait?
Did he swallow it? He was arrested as he got off the boat at Folkestone. Some weeks later, and incidentally, that Holmes had spent a day at Windsor Castle and returned with a remarkably fine emerald tie-pin. When I asked him where he got it, he answered it was just a small present from a certain gracious little old lady for whom he'd been able to do a small favor.
Yes, and I think I can guess the lady's august name.
Elementary, my dear Mr. Manning, elementary.
I see. Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment, Dr. Watson will be back to tell us about next week's story. In the meantime, let us repeat. Watch out for colds. At the first sign of a cold, take Grove's bromoquinine tablets. Bromoquinine tablets are made especially for the relief of colds. In other words, they're specialized medication, and that's what you want. Yes, the very first sneeze or sniffle, go right to your druggist and get a package of Grove's bromoquinine tablets. Now, Dr. Watson, next week?
Next week, I think I'll tell you the story of the lion's mane.
The lion's mane? What was that, Dr. Watson?
Well, the answer to that question, Mr. Manning, almost stumped Sherlock Holmes himself. Suffice it to say that they were the last words gasped out by a dying man as he lay writhing in agony on the sands of the Sussex coast.
You have been listening to a Sherlock Holmes adventure, adapted from Arthur Conan Doyle's story, The Bruce Partington Plans, with Basil Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes and Nigel Bruce as Dr. Watson. The dramatization was by Edith Miser. This program is presented from Hollywood every week at this same time by the makers of Grove's bromoquinine tablets. Quick relief for colds. This is Knox Manning speaking.
This is the National Broadcasting Company.
Petri Wine brings you Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce in the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The Petri family, the family that took time to bring you good wine, invite you to listen to Dr. Watson tell us another exciting adventure he shared with his old friend, that master detective, Sherlock Holmes. Oh, and say, I'd like to tell you about something myself. I'd like to tell you about the wine that more Americans prefer than any other wine. That wine is port. And if you want to know why port is such a favorite, just pour yourself a glass of wonderful Petri California port. Look at that Petri port. Look at its glowing deep red color. And sample that aroma. It'll remind you of a walk through a dew-covered vineyard. And now taste that Petri port. Boy, you've got something. Petri Port is one of the most delicious wines ever poured from a bottle. Right then and there, Petri Port will become your favorite wine. I'm confident of that. And I'm sure you'll want to serve Petri Port to your friends, too. After dinner or any time they drop in for a visit. And remember, you can serve Petri Port proudly. Because those letters, P-E-T-R-I, spell the proudest name in the history of American wines. Petri. Petri wine. And now I'm sure our good friend Dr. Watson's ready for us. Let's go in and join him.
Come in. Ah, there you are, Mr. Bartell.
Good evening. Excuse me, Dr. Watson. I didn't know that you had company.
Shut the door, my boy, and come in and join us. Let me introduce you, Mr. Bartell. This is my friend, Mrs. Campbell.
How do you do, Mrs. Campbell?
How do you do, Mr. Bartell?
Mrs. Campbell is a very old friend of mine from England, and when she called on me today, I persuaded her to stay and have dinner, and then join us in this little session of storytelling. You see, Mr. Bartell, she's really what you might call the star of the Sherlock Holmes adventure that I'm going to tell you tonight.
Oh, come now, Dr. Watson. I actually played a very small part in the story. In any case, I was much too young at the time to know what was really going on.
Say, this is a great idea, Doctor. One of the characters out of your fabulous past here in California in 1946 and helps tell her own story.
Oh, no, Mr. Bartell. I'm no storyteller. That's the doctor's department. I'll just listen.
No, my dear. I'll set the scene, but you must ring up the curtain, as it were. In any case, my memory isn't too clear on some of the early points in connection with the case, You will have to help me out.
Oh, but you're talking to millions of listeners on the radio. I'd be terrified to speak over the air.
We're on the air now, Mrs. Campbell.
Oh, we're not, are we? Oh, dear.
No. Don't worry, Cynthia. If they're kind enough to listen to me week after week, I'm sure they'll be delighted to hear you. And now to get on with the story. The title, The Adventure of the Living Doll. The setting, the Sussex Downs, near the bee farm to which Sherlock Holmes retired. The period, 1910. And now, Cynthia, my dear, the curtain belongs to you. Supposing you set it for us.
Well, I'll try. We were living on the Sussex Downs also, Mr. Bartell, at that time. My name was then Cynthia Browning. My father, Arthur Browning, had been dead for some years, but my mother kept up the estate with a manager, a Mr. Hugh Tanner. I was away at school most of the year, of course, but the happiest times of my childhood were spent during those long summer months in Sussex. I lived in a small world, knowing only a few people and loving all of them, or almost all. First of all, there was Mother herself. She was the most beautiful woman in the world, and the sweetest. I remember she gave me a puppy on my 12th birthday. His name was Dusty, and he was so sweet. I talked to Mother about him one day. I must have sounded terribly young.
Mommy, darling, I do love Dusty. Very, very much. He's a lovely puppy, and you gave him to me.
You love him, Cynthia. I know that. But I've been feeding him. That's your job, darling. It's good for grown-up people to have responsibility.
Oh, Mommy, I'll feed him. Of course I will. I'll feed him so full, he'll burst.
Then there was the estate manager, Hugh Tanner, such a pleasant man, and so willing to tell a 12-year-old all the things that a 12-year-old has to know or die.
But, Mr. Tanner, why did you have to shoot the horse? He'd only broken his leg.
Cynthia, horses aren't like human beings. Their legs won't mend. Now think of a horse that couldn't frisk and run and gallop across the downs. We're actually being kind to him. Honest we are, Cynthia.
And then there was Frank King, the painter who lived on the downs. He taught me to open my eyes and really see things.
No, Cynthia. That sunset isn't red. It's gold and rust. And the water, child, look at it. It's almost rose in this light. Rose flecked with cobwebs of eggshell blue. Cynthia, darling, a sunset's never just one color. Do try and remember that, won't you?
And then there was Mr. Pound from the city. I gathered that he was terribly rich and